Welcome back, valued listener. I trust that this evening finds you comfortably settled, ready to relax and allow your thoughts to wander into the enchanting realm of ancient history. Before we dive into our story, I'm eager to hear where you're tuning in from tonight. Perhaps you're nestled in a warm flat in London, just as the urban clamour starts to fade. Or you might be enjoying a leisurely Sunday morning, sipping coffee at a sunlit kitchen table in Sydney. Wherever you are, I'm grateful to share this moment with you. If these soothing explorations through history resonate with you, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Tonight we begin an intriguing journey into the lives of some of history's most infamous and mysterious figures, the emperors of ancient Rome. At the pinnacle of its influence, the Roman Empire stretched from the misty moors of Britain to the sun-drenched sands of Egypt, showcasing a breathtaking tapestry of cultures, languages, and peoples. At its core was the eternal city of Rome, a grand city of marble, strength, and splendor. Here, at the vibrant center of the empire, larger-than-life personas vied, plotted, and struggled for supreme authority. The emperors of Rome were no ordinary individuals. They were demigods exercising total control over millions. Yet behind their imperial masks were mere mortals, just as flawed and vulnerable as anyone else. Some were exceptional statesmen who broadened the empire's borders, while others were deranged tyrants intoxicated by power and indulgence. Regardless of whether they were idolized or loathed, the names of Rome's emperors have reverberated throughout history, enchanting generations. As we explore the scandalous narratives of the Caesars, we will encounter accounts of extraordinary excess, heartbreaking betrayals, and chilling cruelty. Yet, we will also uncover unexpected instances of compassion, humor, and even redemption. The true accounts of these iconic leaders are frequently more bizarre than any tale spun by fiction, filled with surprising developments that rival the most intense Hollywood dramas. So find a comfortable spot, my dear friend. Allow me to recount for you the astonishing story of Rome's emperors. Close your eyes and let my words craft a vivid imagery within your mind, whisking you away to a period when the eternal city sparkled as the heart of the known world. Listen to the sound of chariot wheels clattering over cobbled streets. Inhale the fragrant spices wafting from the bustling markets. Touch the cool marble monuments with your fingertips. Our narrative starts with Augustus, the first emperor, who emerged from the ruins of civil strife to bring forth a golden era of peace and prosperity. Originally named Octavius, he was Julius Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son. Following Caesar's brutal assassination, the 18-year-old Octavius was suddenly thrust into the ruthless arena of Roman politics. Yet, the young man demonstrated his prowess as a master strategist, outsmarting his adversaries to become the singular ruler of the Roman realm. He embodied many roles: a shrewd administrator who stabilized the empire's finances, a crafty politician who formed alliances and neutralized foes, and a generous supporter of the arts, enhancing Rome with magnificent public works. Augustus was careful to disguise his power beneath the facade of republican tradition, never declaring himself a monarch outright. Instead, he referred to himself as the first citizen, piously claiming to have reinstated the ancient freedoms of Rome. Still, it was undeniable that he wielded absolute power, governing with a gentle yet firm grip. Under Augustus's leadership, the empire thrived, heralding the celebrated Pax Romana, or Roman peace. It was a time of cultural flourishing, as poets like Virgil and Horace extolled the virtues of the imperial regime. All around, structures celebrating Augustus's magnificence emerged from the landscape, temples, arches, and aqueducts affirming his divine status. Yet, amidst the glow of his accomplishments, a darker reality crept into Augustus's illustrious rule. His personal life was plagued by heartbreak and controversy. From the premature passing of his cherished heirs to the rumored infidelities of his daughter Julia. Despite his proclamations of republican ideals, Augustus irrevocably altered Rome, centralizing authority in the hands of one fallible individual. As Augustus approached his final years, the specter of succession hung over the empire. With his chosen successors deceased, the aging ruler was compelled to rely on his stepson Tiberius, a morose and aloof figure who garnered little warmth from the populace. When Augustus passed away in 14 AD, it was Tiberius who ascended to the throne, marking the start of a lengthy line of emperors who would significantly influence Rome's fate. However, Tiberius, as we shall discover, stood in stark contrast to the genial and capable Augustus. Paranoid and introspective, he withdrew from public view, administering the empire from the seclusion of his villa on the island of Capri. During his reign, an atmosphere of suspicion and accusation enveloped Rome, as the emperor's dreaded enforcers hunted down any signs of disloyalty or dissent. As our narrative progresses, we will encounter a vivid array of characters who followed in Tiberius's footsteps. The deranged and depraved Caligula, the sagacious and scholarly Claudius, the artistic yet despotic Nero. Each ruler left an indelible imprint on the empire, for better or worse, influenced by their aspirations, anxieties, and mistakes. Yet throughout these trials, the essence of Rome persisted, symbolizing the durability and creativity of the Roman populace. Even amid the bleakest times of imperial mismanagement, the empire stood as a beacon of civilization, a bright light in a tumultuous world of chaos and barbarism. So let us embark on a time-traveling journey back to ancient Rome, experiencing the victories and sorrows of its most renowned figures. Rest your weary head, dear listener, and allow the eternal city to weave its enchantment into your dreams. Tomorrow our journey unfolds further. The Roman Empire represented a collection of contradictions, a civilization marked by incredible strides in engineering, art, and law, yet also a platform for some of the most infamous tyrants in history. At the pinnacle of influence, the Roman emperors indulged in extravagant excesses, unleashed brutal violence, and committed sordid betrayals that continue to astonish us even centuries later. To truly grasp the intricate machinations of the imperial court, we must first envision the vast empire over which these rulers held sway. At its zenith, the Roman Empire extended from the misty hills of Britain to the scorching deserts of Arabia. From the churning Atlantic to the gleaming Euphrates, all paths led to Rome, the eternal city, where the emperor reigned with unmatched authority and opulence. The emperor's decree was absolute, his whims became policy, and his desires captivated the attention of millions. Within the imperial palace atop the Palatine Hill, surrounded by grand marble halls and pillared courtyards, the intricate game of politics unfolded through hushed conspiracies and abrupt coups as individuals plotted and killed for the ultimate gain. Let us commence our narrative with the first and most illustrious of the emperors, Augustus, the adopted son and successor of Julius Caesar. Originally named Octavius, this frail youth appeared an unlikely candidate for greatness. Yet through cunning, unrelenting ambition, and sheer determination, he ascended to the pinnacle of the ruthless landscape that was Roman politics in the late Republic. Following his triumph over Mark Antony and Cleopatra, Octavian stood unopposed, the master of the Roman world. With modesty, he claimed to restore the Republic, while effectively holding the reins of power as the first citizen, or princeps. Thus, the era of the emperors commenced. Under Augustus, Rome achieved the climax of its power and wealth. The Pax Romana, or Roman peace, endured from the Rhine to the Nile, as remarkable public works transformed the capital with baths, aqueducts, theatres, and temples. As Augustus famously declared, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble." Yet, as he advanced in years, the issue of succession loomed large over him. Without a biological son, he opted for his stepson, Tiberius, an unremarkable, uncharismatic figure who had nonetheless demonstrated valor in battle. Upon Augustus's death in 14 AD, Tiberius donned the imperial mantle and began a protracted and troubled reign. In contrast to Augustus's affable and conciliatory nature, Tiberius was marked by a brooding and distrustful demeanor. He departed from Rome to the island of Capri, where he spiraled into a haze of paranoia and depravity. The number of treason trials surged as informants preyed on the affluent, while the aging emperor entertained himself with shocking scandals in his pleasure gardens. Despite this, Tiberius made one significant decision. He named as his successor a young man known as Gaius, who is more infamously recognized as Caligula. The son of a revered general, Caligula was a spoiled youth who had been a mascot for the legions, wandering about the battlefields in miniature armor and tiny military boots, which earned him his nickname. When Tiberius eventually passed away, some claiming he was smothered by a pillow at Caligula's command, the 25-year-old burst onto the scene as a fresh beacon of hope for the empire. He liberated political detainees, hosted magnificent games and gladiatorial spectacles, and captivated the populace with his youthful exuberance. However, Caligula's promising start devolved into a reign characterized by insanity and horror. A mix of illness and power appeared to destabilize his psyche. The once boyish smile morphed into a visage of chilling brutality. He indulged in carnage, torture, and sexual excess. If the accounts hold any truth, he appointed his horse as a priest, commanded the army to gather seashells as spoils of war from Neptune, and even attempted to make the horse a consul. After 4 years of escalating madness, Caligula was assassinated by his own guards in a coup within the palace. Chaos ensued as the Senate deliberated a potential return to a republic. Yet the Praetorian Guard had other plans. While searching the palace, they discovered a middle-aged man trembling behind a curtain. Claudius, Caligula's uncle, was a timid scholar who had played the jester to stay safe. The Praetorians dragged the confused Claudius before the soldiers and declared him the new emperor. Despite any flaws he may have had, Claudius was not devoid of bravery or resolve. Overcoming his stutter and unsteady walk, he set out to establish his authority and demonstrate his effectiveness as an administrator. Under Claudius's rule, the empire grew as he initiated the conquest of Britain and added new provinces. He invested significantly in public infrastructure, enlarging the harbor at Ostia and constructing new aqueducts to accommodate Rome's expanding populace. Yet, despite his reliable governance, Claudius was not particularly discerning when it came to marrying. His third spouse, Valeria Messalina, was a party enthusiast of legendary proportions. Her constant infidelities and orgies became the talk of the town. Eventually, her behavior crossed a line when she publicly wed one of her lovers in a mock ceremony. Even the cuckolded Claudius could not overlook such a blatant offense. He commanded Messalina's execution and soon made the most consequential choice of his reign. For his fourth wife, Claudius selected his niece, Agrippina the Younger, a scheming beauty with grand ambitions, not for herself but for her son from a previous marriage, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who would become the Emperor Nero. From the outset, Agrippina plotted to see her son ascend the throne. She convinced Claudius to adopt the boy and name him heir, sidelining his own son Britannicus. Then, according to ancient narratives, she served Claudius a lethal dinner, poisoning him with mushrooms to enable Nero, a charming 16-year-old, to seize the imperial throne. In the early stages of his reign, Nero made a favorable impression, guided by capable advisors like the philosopher Seneca, but his true self soon became apparent. He had his half-brother Britannicus poisoned during a banquet and orchestrated the assassination of his mother Agrippina when her influence became too burdensome. The young emperor considered himself a remarkable artist, preferring the spotlight of the stage over that of the throne room. He commanded that statues of himself be erected, coins be minted with his image, and countless festivals be held to showcase his questionable abilities as a musician and charioteer. Yet, Nero's name will forever remain associated with one of the most significant disasters in Roman history, the catastrophic fire that ravaged much of the city in 64 AD. As the flames consumed the tightly packed homes and shops, it was said that Nero observed the blaze from a tower, singing about the fall of Troy. There were whispers suggesting that Nero himself had ignited the fire to clear space for his lavish golden palace. To divert suspicion, he found a convenient scapegoat, a small group of Christians whose clandestine rituals and talk of a forthcoming kingdom made them easy targets for blame. Nero initiated the first large-scale persecution, subjecting Christians to torture and setting them ablaze as living torches. As discontent grew, Nero's paranoia escalated, leading him to execute former allies like Seneca. The empire teetered on the edge of collapse. Eventually, the legions could endure no more. Revolts erupted across the provinces, and Roman governors rose up against him. Abandoned by the Praetorian Guard, Nero was declared a public enemy by the Senate. In desperation, he fled to a rural villa, where he opted to end his life on his own terms, plunging a dagger into his throat with the aid of a loyal freedman. His final words were a lament, "What an artist dies in me." With Nero's demise, the dynasty established by Augustus came to an end. The empire descended into a period of chaos known as the Year of the Four Emperors, as rival claimants fought for dominance. First to rise was Galba, a stern general who was not favored by the soldiers due to his strictness and frugality. Just months after assuming power, he was assassinated by the Praetorians in the Forum, hacked to pieces so ruthlessly that his severed head was displayed on a pike for his usurper Oo. Yet Oo, who had once shared drinks with Nero, found his claim to power contested by Vitellius, the commander of the legions in Germania. The two armies clashed in a significant battle at Bedriacum in northern Italy. Upon learning of his army's defeat, Oo chose to fall upon his sword, determined to save the empire from further slaughter. Vitellius, on the other hand, would prove to be a dismal emperor, far more interested in indulging in lavish feasts than in ruling. As he dined, a formidable rival was gaining strength in the east. Titus Flavius Vespasianus, a seasoned general fresh from quelling the Jewish uprising in Judea. Named emperor by the legions of Syria and Egypt, Vespasian dispatched his forces, led by Mark Antony Primus, advancing into Italy. In a second battle at Bedriacum, Vitellius's forces were decisively defeated. Vespasian's brother Titus stormed into Rome, and Vitellius was dragged from his palace, tortured, and tossed into the Tiber. With Vespasian's triumph, a new imperial lineage began. The Flavians would govern for 27 years, a period marked by consolidation and construction. As the Colosseum was built and Pompeii disappeared beneath the ashes of Vesuvius, Vespasian proved to be a steady leader, stabilizing the empire's finances and restoring order to the military. After a decade of competent governance, Vespasian passed the reins to his eldest son, Titus, the conqueror of Jerusalem. Though initially known for his extravagance and romantic escapades, Titus rose to the occasion of leadership, managing relief efforts following the eruption of Vesuvius with compassion and vigor. His sudden death from fever, after a brief 2-year rule, was met with mourning for the promising ruler taken too soon. In contrast, Vespasian's youngest son, Domitian, was a vastly different character. An average administrator and military leader, he was consumed by grandiose illusions of his own divinity, insisting on being hailed as master and god, while saturating the empire with his statues. Brooding and paranoid, Domitian instigated a terror-filled regime, inflicting torture and executing senators and officials on dubious grounds. He maintained a list of traitors marked for death and took pleasure in sadistic spectacles in the arena. After a 15-year rule of despotism, he was fatally stabbed in his bedroom by a group of conspirators led by his chamberlain. With Domitian's assassination in 96 AD, an era came to a close. The Senate swiftly appointed a venerable statesman known as Nerva as emperor. This marked the beginning of the golden age of the 5 good emperors, a dynasty characterized by merit rather than bloodlines. Each emperor would adopt a deserving successor to follow him. This period was marked by prosperity, expansion, and a degree of stability. Following a century of chaos and excess, under the wise governance of Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, the empire reached its zenith, stretching from Hadrian's Wall in Britain to the borders of Mesopotamia. Law, education, and commerce thrived. The Stoic philosophy espoused by Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5, embodied the ideal of a restrained emperor. However, the age of reason came to a halt with the rise of Marcus Aurelius's cruel and deranged son, Commodus, in 180 AD. A muscle-bound megalomaniac, Commodus saw himself as the reincarnation of Hercules. He fought in the arena as a gladiator, slaying exotic animals for the roaring crowds. After more than 10 years of mismanagement, a palace coup eventually brought his bloody rule to an end. This marked the beginning of a new cycle of chaos and civil war, ushering in a crisis for the empire. In the tumultuous 3rd century, over 20 emperors would ascend and fall, many meeting violent ends after only brief periods in power. Among the most infamous was Elagabalus, a teenage priest of the Assyrian sun god. Elagabalus appalled Rome with his effeminate clothing, extravagant rituals, and outrageous sexual behavior. He was ultimately murdered by his own guards, with his disfigured body dragged through the streets. The empire appeared to be on the brink of collapse, plagued by invasions from barbarian tribes, outbreaks of disease, economic downturns, and ongoing uprisings. The Emperor Valerian was captured during a confrontation with the Persian monarch, Shapur-Vas, facing an unprecedented disgrace. It was Diocletian, a soldier emperor with remarkable vision, who eventually restored order. To secure the empire's stability, Diocletian implemented a division of authority among 4 co-emperors, creating a framework known as the Tetrarchy. While this system achieved short-term success, it ultimately descended into further civil conflict. From the aftermath, Constantine the Great emerged, destined to change the empire in ways unmatched since Augustus's reign. In 312 AD, leading up to a battle with his adversary Maxentius, Constantine had a profound vision of a cross illuminated in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In this sign, conquer." Advancing under the symbol of Christianity, Constantine emerged victorious and subsequently established Christianity as the state religion. He established a new eastern capital, Constantinople, which would stand as the center of the Roman Empire for another millennium following Rome's fall. With the rise of Constantine, the classical era of Roman emperors concluded. The ancient deities faded, giving way to a new epoch. Nonetheless, the narratives of madness, excess, and cruelty that characterized numerous emperors continue to intrigue and shock us. The experiences of the Caesars serve as a warning about the corruptive nature of unchecked power, highlighting the fragility of civilization and mankind's dual potential for greatness and vice. Ultimately, the emperors were merely men, all too human, wrestling with the immense responsibilities of an enduring empire. Soft, soothing narration. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon over the sparkling Mediterranean, the magnificent city of Rome glimmered as a beacon amidst the encroaching night. Set atop its 7 hills, the capital of the expansive Roman Empire was a breathtaking sight to behold. Shimmering marble temples and lively forums spoke volumes about the prosperity and refinement of this diverse city. It was often said that all routes led to Rome. At the heart of it all, in magnificent palaces perched atop Palatine Hill, lived the emperor, the most formidable figure in the ancient world. Yet despite the exterior splendor, the imperial court was rife with darker truths. A sordid realm dominated by fierce ambition, insatiable greed, and lethal rivalries. Roman emperors enjoyed godlike privileges, their every desire catered to, their authority unchecked. Still, their existence was fraught with danger, as betrayal and violent demise were ever-present companions to these often unpredictable rulers who schemed tirelessly to reach the pinnacle of power. Perhaps no sovereign epitomized the duality of triumph and excess in imperial Rome, quite like Nero. As the final emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty established by Augustus, Nero's 14-year rule stunned and captivated the ancient world. Born as Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus in 37 AD, Nero was both the nephew and the adopted son of Emperor Claudius. His mother, Julia Agrippina, was a great-granddaughter of Augustus and an ambitious woman determined to see her son on the throne. She resorted to manipulation and even murder to eliminate obstacles and convinced Claudius to name Nero as his successor. Following Claudius's sudden death in 54 AD, likely from a plate of poisoned mushrooms prepared by Agrippina, Nero became emperor at the mere age of 16. However, the young ruler soon grew restless under his mother's overpowering dominance. As tensions flared, Nero orchestrated Agrippina's assassination, a shocking act of matricide that hinted at the moral decay that would follow. Now, free from her influence, Nero plunged deeply into a world of hedonistic pleasures and artistic endeavors. He fancied himself not just a ruler, but also a remarkable poet, musician, and charioteer, often compelling senators and the public to endure his lengthy, self-indulgent performances. Enormous statues were constructed in his likeness, while his lavish residence, a vast palace of unimaginable splendor, ascended in the very center of Rome. Yet Nero's grandiose dreams took a tragic twist in 64 AD when a colossal fire swept through the city. For 9 relentless days, flames devastated 2/3 of Rome, and according to reports, Nero observed the blaze from a tower, performing a song about the fall of Troy in his theatrical attire. Whispers circulated that the emperor himself may have ignited the fire to clear space for a larger palace. In a bid to divert suspicion, Nero turned against the Christians, a minor group at the time, launching the first widespread persecution of believers by throwing them to wild beasts, crucifying them, and using them as living torches. The emperor's outrageous behavior and poor governance eventually drained the empire's patience. Confronted with insurrections from the military, the Senate declared him an enemy of the state. As troops closed in, the despondent emperor chose suicide. "What an artist dies in me," he lamented before compelling his secretary to push a dagger into his neck. At the age of 30, the last of the Julio-Claudians breathed his last, leaving behind a legacy steeped in infamy that would resonate through history. Nevertheless, Nero's tumultuous rule was just one episode in the protracted and bloody tale of imperial succession. Lacking definitive protocols, the transfer of power frequently devolved into a savage contest of assassination and coercion. Thus, as the year 69 AD approached, Rome plunged into turmoil as rival claimants struggled for dominance. In just 12 months, the empire would witness the ascent and demise of 4 distinct emperors. The first was Galba, a senator and governor of Hispania, who had revolted against Nero. Celebrated as the new Augustus, he entered Rome expecting a gracious reception. Instead, he encountered overt animosity from the Praetorian Guard, who were displeased by his refusal to provide the customary payment. Galba's stingy practices and harsh discipline swiftly fostered discontent. His reign endured a mere 7 months before Oo, a former ally turned adversary, had him slain in the Roman Forum. Yet, Oo's grasp on power would be fleeting. Concurrently, the legions stationed in Germany had chosen to back their own leader, Vitellius. As the forces loyal to Vitellius advanced towards Rome, Oo's army suffered a decisive defeat in a brutal clash at Bedroacum. Opting to avoid further bloodshed, Oo took his own life after a reign that lasted merely 3 months. Vitellius triumphantly entered the capital, only to reveal himself as a gluttonous and merciless tyrant. He indulged in extravagant banquets, while his soldiers ran rampant, and the empire began to descend into chaos. The Eastern legions, appalled by his actions, rallied behind their seasoned general Vespasian. As the Flavians pushed into Italy, Vitellius made a lackluster attempt to relinquish power before retreating into the palace. On December 20th, 69 AD, he was dragged through the streets, tortured, and ultimately thrown into the Tiber. Thus concluded the tumultuous year of the 4 emperors, a chaotic eruption of violence and instability that laid bare the perilous cracks of a system reliant on military strength and personal allure rather than lawful governance. Vespasian's rise would initiate a much-needed period of effective leadership and usher in a new imperial dynasty. Nevertheless, the specter of unrest and brutality would forever linger within the corridors of power in Rome. As night enveloped the palace district, its marble facades illuminated by the moon, everything appeared deceptively serene. Here, at the empire's vibrant core behind the towering walls of the Doisa Gugustana, the emperor lay alone, caught between dreams of glory and fears of betrayal. Little did he realize which would pose the greater threat in the unpredictable days to come, external enemies or the inner demons. As we explore further into the turbulent chronicle of the Roman emperors, we encounter a notably unstable phase referred to as the Year of the 4 Emperors. In the aftermath of Nero's astonishing downfall, the empire was thrust into disarray as a swift succession of aspiring rulers competed for the throne. The initial contender to assert his claim was Servius Sulpicius Galba, a seasoned general and the governor of Hispania. Declared emperor by his legions, Galba advanced towards Rome, but he quickly revealed his unsuitability for the position. Misguided and excessively rigid, he soon alienated the Praetorian Guard by failing to deliver on promised bonuses. Discontent simmered until the Praetorians decided to take action, brutally murdering Galba in the Roman Forum just 7 months into his rule. In his stead, the Praetorians elevated Marcus Salvius Otho, a close friend and ally of Nero. Yet Otho's reign would be even shorter than that of his predecessor. To the north, the legions stationed in Germania had declared their loyalty to their commander, Aulus Vitellius. As Vitellius marched his army down the Italian peninsula, Otho confronted him but suffered a decisive defeat. Rather than dragging out the civil war, Otho chose to end his own life. His brief rule as emperor lasted only 3 months. Vitellius entered Rome in triumph, celebrated as emperor by the Senate, but he had little time to relish his success. In the eastern provinces, the experienced general Titus Flavius Vespasianus had been proclaimed emperor by his own legions. As Vespasian moved westward, Vitellius's support began to crumble. The legions along the Danube turned against him, advancing on Rome and overpowering Vitellius's defenders in a fierce urban clash. Vitellius was captured, tortured, and executed, his body unceremoniously tossed into the Tiber River. Thus, Vespasian, the 4th emperor to rule during this chaotic year, finally seized firm control of the empire. The Flavian dynasty he established would restore much-needed stability following the turmoil of the preceding months. However, as we will see, even Vespasian and his sons would not escape the intrigues and excesses that frequently marked the lives of Roman emperors. Vespasian demonstrated his capabilities as an efficient and skilled leader, which was a refreshing departure from the hedonistic pursuits of some of his predecessors. Coming from relatively modest beginnings, he infused practical realism into the governance of the empire. He revamped the tax structure, initiated significant construction projects like the Colosseum, and effectively quelled uprisings in Judea and Gaul. Yet, even the most adept emperors are vulnerable to the caprices of fate and the machinations of their inner circle. In 79 AD, after 10 years of steady leadership, Vespasian fell ill and passed away, entrusting the empire to his eldest son, Titus. While his rule was brief, abruptly ended by a sudden illness, Titus had already established a reputation as a formidable military leader, highlighted by his merciless conquest of Jerusalem in 70 AD. However, it was Vespasian's younger son, Domitian, who would become the most controversial of the Flavian emperors. Domitian's reign, lasting 15 years after Titus's death, began with promise, but gradually devolved into paranoia and egomania. He demanded to be called master and god, executed numerous senators on dubious charges of treason, and even had a cousin put to death based on flimsy allegations. Ultimately, Domitian's excesses led to his assassination in 96 AD during a palace coup. The once revered Flavian dynasty ended in disgrace, starkly illustrating how quickly power can corrupt even the most capable rulers. Yet, from the ashes of Domitian's downfall, a new chapter began for the empire. The so-called 5 good emperors ushered in a time of relative peace, prosperity, and imperial growth. It all commenced with the short rule of the elderly senator Nerva, who was hastily appointed by those who had overthrown Domitian. To reinforce his precarious position, Nerva made a shrewd political decision by adopting the popular General Trajan as his successor. Upon Nerva's death after a brief 16-month reign, Trajan was prepared to don the imperial purple, heralding a time of military triumphs and territorial expansion that would see the empire reach its zenith. His campaigns in Dacia and Parthia enriched Rome's treasury with spoils of war and adorned its public spaces with monumental structures, including the renowned Trajan's Column. Yet he was more than a conqueror. Trajan was celebrated for his equity, temperance, and esteem for the Senate traits that won him widespread admiration among the populace. When he passed away in 117 AD, he was succeeded peacefully by Hadrian, his hand-picked successor. In stark contrast to the martial Trajan, Hadrian was a sophisticated, well-traveled thinker with a love for art, architecture, and Greek philosophy. His leadership emphasized diplomacy and consolidation rather than further conquest, as he retreated from some of Trajan's more overstretched borders. Hadrian is often remembered for the expansive villa he constructed at Tivoli and for the impressive wall he built across Britain to define the empire's northern boundary. Nonetheless, he was also a deeply complex and often melancholic individual, marked by the loss of his young lover, Antinous, whom he mourned lavishly and even posthumously, honored as a deity. Hadrian's successors, Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, largely continued his policies, representing a period marked by relative peace that historian Edward Gibbon would later describe as the happiest in human history. Antoninus governed serenely for over 20 years, steering clear of significant conflicts while concentrating on effective governance. Marcus Aurelius, known as the philosopher emperor, confronted more substantial challenges, including invasions, plagues, and family discord, but met these adversities with the stoic determination reflected in his acclaimed meditations. Yet even during this era of imperial prosperity, the persistent issue of succession loomed large once more. In a pivotal decision that would have lasting repercussions, Marcus Aurelius opted to deviate from recent customs and appointed his own son Commodus as his successor. This choice would cast the empire back into turmoil and herald a new age of disorder. It soon became evident that Commodus was fundamentally different from his wise and temperate father. Egotistical, rash, and exhibiting a ruthless nature, he wasted no time in dismantling much of Marcus Aurelius's achievements. He ordered the execution of numerous prominent senators, often with the flimsiest of justifications, seizing their fortunes to sustain his lavish way of life. However, Commodus was most obsessed with the gladiatorial games. Unlike his predecessors who merely sponsored these spectacles, he insisted on participating himself, slaughtering exotic beasts by the dozens and facing off against poorly matched adversaries, relishing the cheers of the common crowd. This brazen display appalled and distanced the senatorial elite. In 192 AD, following over 10 years of mismanagement, Commodus met his demise when a wrestler named Narcissus strangled him in the bath, allegedly under the direction of his own inner circle. His death marked the conclusion of the Nerva Antonine dynasty and threw the empire back into civil unrest. Amid the ensuing scramble for power, a respected senator named Pertinax was briefly proclaimed emperor, only to be killed by the Praetorian Guard after just 87 days. What ensued was a moment of profound disgrace for the empire, as the Praetorians auctioned off the imperial throne to the highest bidder. The fortunate winner of this sordid auction was Didius Julianus, a wealthy senator who enjoyed his purchase. Reigned for a mere 9 weeks before being dethroned and executed by the forces of Septimius Severus, a battle-hardened general from North Africa. Severus would subsequently establish a new dynasty and leave his mark on the empire. However, his ascent to power served as a striking reminder of how much the Principate had deteriorated since Augustus's era. Under Caius and those who followed him, the empire adopted an increasingly militant and authoritarian nature. Caius generously rewarded the legions to win their favor, a strategy that would later lead to turmoil as armies clashed to place their preferred leaders in power. He also engaged in successful military campaigns against the Parthians in the east, pushing Rome's boundaries to their farthest limits. Yet, like many emperors before him, Caius grappled with succession issues. His two sons, Caracalla and Geta, were fierce competitors, and their rivalry erupted into violence following Caius's death in 211 AD. Caracalla had his younger sibling murdered before their mother, ushering in a reign characterized by fear as he executed thousands of perceived enemies. Caracalla is perhaps best remembered for the massive bath complex he built in Rome and the citizenship decree that granted Roman citizenship to all free men in the empire, likely driven more by a desire for tax income than any notion of equality. His unpredictable and tyrannical conduct rendered him highly unpopular, culminating in his assassination by a disgruntled soldier during a campaign in the East in 217 AD. This was followed by a rapid succession of emperors as generals and praetorian, prefects vied for dominance. The teenage Elagabalus, a priest of an exotic sun god from Syria, shocked Roman norms with his outrageous sexual behavior and peculiar religious practices before being killed by his own guards. His cousin and successor, Alexander Seius, was a more dignified leader but fell victim to a mutiny after a disastrous confrontation with the Germanic tribes. The chaotic period that ensued after Alexander's death is often referred to as the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when the very existence of the empire appeared threatened. An astonishing number of would-be emperors emerged and disappeared in rapid succession, with many of their reigns lasting just a few months or even just a few weeks. The empire splintered into competing regional factions as ambitious generals established their own fragmented states. This period witnessed some of the most unexpected personalities don the imperial purple. Philip the Arab was one such figure, who oversaw the millennial anniversary of Rome's founding in 247 AD, only to be slain in battle against his successor, Deus. Similarly, Valerian faced a tragic fate, being captured by the Persian Sassanids and spending his final days as a human footstool for their king, before allegedly being taxidermied and displayed as a trophy. Yet from this harsh elimination of emperors, a handful of truly significant leaders arose. These individuals managed to instate a semblance of order amid the chaos, employing a blend of military skill, administrative expertise, and sheer determination. Among them, Diocletian stands out, a common soldier from Dalmatia, who seized control in 284 AD after a notoriously violent power struggle. Diocletian's noteworthy reform was the tetrarchy, a ruling system that divided imperial authority among 4 co-emperors, 2 senior Augusti and 2 junior Caesars. This approach aimed to ensure stable succession and enable more efficient governance by sharing responsibilities, and for a time it succeeded. Diocletian and his partner Maximian were able to suppress internal rebellions, fend off foreign threats, and implement extensive economic and administrative reforms. However, the tetrarchy also planted the seeds of future discord. Upon Diocletian and Maximian's retirement in 305 AD, the first and only emperors to voluntarily step down, successors, Constantius and Galerius, quickly fell into infighting. The system collapsed as rival claimants once more threw the empire into civil war. From this turmoil emerged one of the monumental figures in Roman history, Constantine the Great, the son of Constantius. Constantine prevailed over his adversaries through an impressive series of military endeavors, ultimately vanquishing the last of them, Licinius, in 324 AD, which established him as the sole ruler of the empire. His era signified a crucial shift in Roman history. Most notably, he embraced Christianity, bringing an end to centuries of sporadic persecution, thereby paving the way for it to emerge as the principal religion of both the empire and Europe. He re-established the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople, which would become the imperial capital for many centuries. Yet in many ways, Constantine's governance exemplified both continuity and change. Like numerous emperors before him, he was fundamentally a military figure who ascended to power through both brutality and shrewdness. He could be merciless in dealing with potential rivals, even going so far as to orchestrate the deaths of his own wife and son under suspicious circumstances. Furthermore, he grappled with the perennial challenge of succession, a dilemma he shared with his predecessors. Following his death in 337 AD, the empire once again split among his surviving sons, setting the stage for renewed power struggles. The familiar pattern of brief periods of stability, followed by turmoil and conflict, appeared poised to repeat itself. However, as we ponder the long and turbulent saga of the Roman emperors, it is vital to remember that despite their numerous flaws and faults, and the rampant indulgence, violence, and betrayal that so often defined their reigns, these individuals maintained one of the most remarkable and enduring empires in history. Through external invasions, internal discord, plagues, famines, and civil wars, Rome persisted for centuries under their rule, and their narratives continue to engage us today, acting as both cautionary examples and subjects of intrigue. There exists a deeply human aspect to the rise and fall of these emperors, with their larger-than-life personalities often meeting disreputable ends. They serve as a stark reminder of the corrupting influence of unrestrained power, illustrating how even the most capable leaders can be brought down by their own arrogance and indulgences. Yet they also highlight the enduring nature of the human spirit. In the bleakest of moments, there are those who step up, who bear the heavy responsibility of leadership and strive, albeit imperfectly, to leave an imprint on history. The Roman emperors, despite their many shortcomings, were undeniably figures who molded the trajectory of human affairs, their legacies resonating through the ages. As we prepare to surrender to sleep, let us reflect on these far-off, almost mythical personas. These individuals who dominated the world like towering giants. Let us celebrate their victories and lament their losses, and let us always remember the insights they offer about the risks and potentials of power. Ultimately, the narrative of the Roman emperors mirrors the broader story of humanity itself in all its splendor and folly. As twilight descended upon the 7 hills of Rome, a serene quiet enveloped the vibrant city that served as the heart of an empire. Within the lavish palaces towering above the landscape, the emperors retreated to their quarters after yet another day of wielding absolute authority over millions, spanning from the foggy heights of Britain to the sun-drenched deserts of Arabia. Yet for these sovereigns, revered as deities on earth, the trappings of vast wealth and command could never entirely alleviate the ever-looming threat of betrayal that lurked in the shadows. To be a Roman emperor meant living daily on the precarious edge of a dazzling sword. Chosen by the military and validated by the Senate, an emperor was the supreme ruler of the known world. However, their hold on power was always fragile, perpetually susceptible to the whims of unpredictable legions, scheming advisors, and even their own kin. In a monarchy where succession rules are often ambiguous, an emperor recognized that even his own offspring could potentially become his most formidable adversaries in the relentless pursuit of the imperial throne. This truth had prevailed for generations, dating back to the pivotal moment over 40 years prior to Christ's birth, when the Roman Republic came to an end, marking the arrival of a baby boy named Octavian. Hailing from one of Rome's oldest patrician families, it was hard to imagine that this frail infant would eventually ascend to become Augustus, the first and arguably the most remarkable of Rome's emperors. Through a mix of daring military campaigns, astute political strategies, and well-crafted propaganda, Augustus adeptly maneuvered through the perilous waters of Roman politics, emerging as the unrivaled ruler of an empire that he would lead into a prosperous golden age of peace. Yet even Augustus was not spared from the harsh truths of dynastic power struggles. Lacking biological heirs, he had to search within his extended family for a fitting successor. Following the untimely deaths of his nephews, Lucius and Gaius, he ultimately chose his stepson Tiberius, a morose and suspicious figure, whose 23-year reign would be overshadowed by treason trials and growing discord with the Senate. After Tiberius's passing in 37 AD, the throne was passed to his grandnephew Gaius, more famously known as Caligula. If any emperor exemplified the duality of grandeur and madness that characterized imperial Rome, it was undoubtedly Caligula. His early reign was marked by prudent and moderate governance, highlighted by extravagant public events and incredibly popular reforms. However, a shift soon occurred. Some attribute this transformation to a serious illness that destabilized his mind, while others suggest he may have been gradually poisoned by a concoction. Regardless of the reason, Caligula quickly spiraled into a chaotic display of sadism and extravagance that would cement his reputation as the most infamous ruler in Roman history. No excess was too shocking, no desire too lavish for Caligula to satisfy. He converted his palace into a brothel filled with the wives of influential citizens. He proclaimed himself a deity in human form and commanded the construction of a bridge so he could ride over the Bay of Naples. Perhaps most notoriously, he even attempted to make his favorite horse a priest and consul. After years of increasing madness, Caligula was ultimately assassinated by his own bodyguards, a fate that would soon affect many who dared to wear the imperial purple. Following Caligula's violent end, the Praetorian Guard dragged his uncle Claudius from behind a curtain and declared him the new ruler of the Roman Empire. A learned scholar with a keen interest in history and law, Claudius proved to be an adept administrator who expanded Roman citizenship and initiated the conquest of Britain. Yet amidst his accomplishments, Claudius found it impossible to escape the treacherous intrigues that plagued his own court. At the forefront of the schemers was his third wife, Valeria Messalina, a femme fatale whose name became emblematic of unquenchable desire. While Claudius was preoccupied with state affairs, Messalina conducted wild orgies and maintained numerous lovers, even audaciously marrying her favorite consort in public in a scandalous act of bigamy. When the news of the sham wedding finally reached Claudius, the betrayed emperor ordered the execution of his wife and several of her suspected lovers. However, Messalina was quickly succeeded by an even more cunning manipulator, Claudius's niece, Agrippina the Younger. Charming, intelligent, and wholly unethical, Agrippina charmed her uncle into marriage and convinced him to adopt her son from a previous relationship. This child was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who would grow to become the Emperor Nero. Once all threats to her son's ascent to power were removed, Agrippina was prepared to act. As per ancient historians, she secretly added toxic mushrooms to Claudius's meal, relishing the moment her despised spouse took his final breath. When the 16-year-old Nero took the throne, there was great optimism that the youthful ruler would lead the empire into a prosperous new era. Under the guidance of the esteemed Stoic philosopher Seneca, Nero initially portrayed himself as a progressive leader who prioritized the well-being of his subjects. He abolished capital punishment, lowered taxes, and granted slaves the ability to lodge complaints against their owners. However, like many Roman emperors before him, Nero ultimately succumbed to the corrupting nature of absolute power. Preoccupied more with his artistic ambitions than the affairs of state, he overlooked governance, while indulging his interests in music, poetry, and chariot racing. He considered himself the premier artist of his time, a misconception supported by the sycophants and courtiers who constantly surrounded him. The gossipy biographer Suetonius reported that Nero even had a nurse executed for laughing during one of his performances. As his behavior became increasingly bizarre, many started to doubt his ability to govern. Amid growing discontent, a massive fire erupted in Rome in the summer of 64 AD. For 9 days, the flames consumed 2/3 of the city, leaving thousands homeless. Whispers circulated that Nero himself had instigated the fire to clear space for his extravagant golden palace. Some even claimed that he played the lyre while his city burned. Regardless of whether the tale of Nero's fiddling is true or false, there's no denying that he seized the catastrophe as a chance to reshape Rome to suit his desires. He constructed a towering 100-foot statue of himself, known as the Colossus of Nero, at the entrance of his vast palace grounds. To fund his lavish projects, he introduced new taxes and expropriated properties from wealthy aristocrats. As opposition to his rule intensified, Nero responded with increasing viciousness. He had his first spouse murdered and ordered the assassination of his mother Agrippina. When a conspiracy to remove him was revealed, he commanded the conspirators, including his former tutor Seneca, to take their own lives. By the time insurrections erupted throughout the empire in 68 AD, he had lost all backing. Labeled a public enemy by the Senate, Nero escaped from Rome and ended his own life, bringing an end to the Julio-Claudian dynasty that had governed for almost a century. In the tumultuous wake of Nero's demise, the Roman Empire was thrust into a brutal civil war, famously known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Rival generals took turns advancing on Rome, vying for power, only to be eliminated by their successors. The first to challenge was Galba, a sagacious old senator who lasted a mere 7 months before being executed by his treacherous soldiers. Following him was Otho, once a drinking companion of Nero, who met his own end by suicide after suffering a defeat in battle. Next came Vitellius, an indulgent general who celebrated his ascendance to the throne with a lavish banquet that included an infamous dish called the Shield of Minerva. This extravagant entree incorporated pike livers, pheasant and peacock brains, flamingo tongues and lamprey milk. However, Vitellius's continual feasting would soon be interrupted. While he indulged in opulent delicacies, a new competitor was approaching, a seasoned general named Vespasian, who had been proclaimed emperor by his legions in the east. As Vespasian's forces drew nearer, Vitellius staged a pitiful last defense, stumbling drunkenly through the streets while attempting to flee, masquerading as a priest. Pulled from his hiding spot in the palace, the corpulent emperor pleaded for mercy before he was brutally beaten to death and discarded into the Tiber River. With this disgraceful conclusion, the tumultuous year of the four emperors finally came to an end. The Flavian dynasty was launched. A seasoned veteran who rose from humble beginnings, Vespasian established himself as one of Rome's most effective and rational leaders. He brought stability to the empire's finances, overhauled the military, and initiated an ambitious construction project that featured landmarks such as the Colosseum. Yet even this reliable ruler was not immune to the scheming that lingered within the Roman court. According to age-old rumors, Vespasian's significantly younger wife, Doatilla, betrayed him with a well-known actor named Paris. Upon discovering this betrayal, the emperor ordered the actor's assassination in public and exiled a noble who dared to voice his concerns about the matter. More credible, though, is the account of Vespasian's demise due to a severe bout of diarrhea. With his characteristic dry humor, he famously quipped, "Dear me, I think I'm turning into a god." Vespasian was succeeded by his elder son Titus, the admired conqueror of Jerusalem, who ruled for a mere 2 years before falling prey to a sudden fever. Ancient historians would often mourn Titus as one of history's greatest what-ifs, a wise and benevolent ruler snuffed out in his youth. His younger brother Domitian, who seized the throne in 81 AD, would not share such a favorable legacy. Described as tall, bald, and self-absorbed, Domitian possessed an ego that led him to insist on being addressed as master and god. He maintained a dedicated group of assistants whose sole purpose was to continually wipe the sweat from his brow. As his paranoia grew, he had the palace halls decorated with reflective moonstone so he could spy on anyone approaching from behind. Domitian had a particular penchant for torturing and killing flies, stabbing them with a needle-like stylus and leaving their carcasses stacked on his desk. According to biographer Suetonius, he once queried a servant regarding whether anyone else was in the palace, to which the servant humorously replied, "Not even a fly." Despite all his precautions, Domitian was ultimately unable to evade the revenge of those he had wronged. In 96 AD, he was murdered in his bedroom by a group of conspirators that included his wife. The deceased tyrant's remains were quickly cremated on a pile of inexpensive wood, while the Senate moved to erase his legacy entirely. Subsequently, they appointed the aged senator Nerva as the new emperor. This marked the first occasion when a ruler was selected by the Senate instead of through military means or family lineage. Although his reign lasted only 16 months before he passed away from natural causes, Nerva's rise to power signified the start of a period that later generations would refer to as the Five Good Emperors. These leaders, who governed Rome from 96 to 180 AD, would preside over the pinnacle of the Roman Empire. Trajan, the bold general who expanded the empire's frontiers to their furthest reaches. Hadrian, the relentless traveler who personally visited nearly every province. Antoninus Pius, the tranquil administrator who ruled with a light yet firm approach. Lastly, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king whose stoic reflections continue to be celebrated as timeless wisdom. This golden era would abruptly and ignominiously conclude with Marcus Aurelius's son, Commodus. A heavily muscled brute with a fascination for gladiatorial contests, Commodus believed himself to be the reincarnation of Hercules. He fought in the arena hundreds of times, typically against disabled opponents and wounded soldiers, armed only with sponges. Like many irrational emperors of the past, Commodus was plagued by constant fears of schemes and plots. His paranoia was so intense that he once had a hapless servant burned alive for making his bath too cold. Yet, no amount of violence could protect him indefinitely. On New Year's Eve of 192 AD, the Praetorian prefect Quintus Aemilius Laetus devised a scheme to save Rome from the increasingly unhinged emperor's depravity. In conjunction with one of Commodus's favored concubines, a wrestler named Narcissus was enlisted to strangle the emperor while he bathed. As Commodus thrashed in the water, Narcissus tightened his strong forearm around the neck of the emperor and squeezed until he sensed the life depart from him. With one last convulsion, the emperor, who had portrayed himself as an unstoppable demigod, drifted into a dishonorable death. The assassination of Commodus would signal the beginning of yet another chaotic time, filled with civil strife and turmoil. His successor, Pertinax, a principled senator reminiscent of Nerva, would meet a gruesome fate at the hands of his own guards, merely 86 days into his rule. Following this event was a whirlwind of fleeting soldier emperors, each emerging from military ranks only to be eliminated by the next ambitious general. There was Septimius Severus, the shrewd North African leader who seized control after a brutal civil war. Then came Caracalla, the brooding megalomaniac who killed his own brother. Elagabalus, the indulgent teenage priest, held hedonistic parties within the palace. Maximinus Thrax, the towering barbarian warrior, transitioned from a shepherd boy to emperor. These men were the products of an empire that had expanded to such an extent that it became too unwieldy for any single ruler to manage. As the borders strained under barbarian invasions and the economy faltered, the 3rd century AD witnessed at least 20 emperors meet violent ends. The Roman Empire itself came perilously close to disintegration amid the overwhelming chaos and disorder. Stability would only return through the rule of Diocletian, a strategic general who implemented significant reforms to restore order when he ascended to power in 284 AD. Diocletian divided the empire into eastern and western halves, each overseen by its own co-emperor. This arrangement, known as the Tetrarchy, facilitated the distribution of the governing responsibilities across such an expansive territory. Additionally, Diocletian endeavored to differentiate the imperial office from the individual emperor, creating formal court rituals and a bureaucracy that would persist long after his departure. Yet there was one young man who would not conform to Diocletian's new structure. His name was Constantine, and he aspired to govern the Roman Empire all by himself. As the offspring of one of Diocletian's co-rulers, Constantine seized the opportunity for power following his father's demise in 306 AD. Through a series of tactical military conquests, he methodically eliminated his adversaries one after another until he emerged as the unchallenged ruler of Rome. The era of Constantine would signify a pivotal moment in Roman history. In 313 AD, he enacted the Edict of Milan, which granted official acceptance of Christianity after centuries of oppression. He later embraced the faith himself, becoming the first Christian emperor and forever altering the trajectory of Western civilization. Additionally, Constantine established a new capital in the east, a dazzling city on the Bosporus that would be named Constantinople. Reflecting on the extensive roster of emperors who governed the Roman Empire, one cannot help but recognize the recurring elements of their tumultuous lives, the immense power they commanded, and the perpetual threat from those seeking to usurp it. The appalling acts of cruelty and debauchery they imposed on their subjects, and the brutal fates that overtook many of them, are striking. This legacy continues to fascinate us even thousands of years later, prompting us to consider the darker aspects of human nature that reside within us all. Nevertheless, for all their imperfections and excesses, it would be erroneous to regard the Roman emperors solely as monsters or tyrants. Among them were also exceptional leaders who broadened the horizons of human knowledge and success. Visionaries like Hadrian, daring conquerors like Trajan, and deep thinkers like Marcus Aurelius. Their victories and challenges left an enduring imprint on the world that is still felt today. As the moon ascends above the decaying splendor of the Roman Forum, we can nearly envision their spirits still traversing the fallen columns and marble. Figures softly calling out to us from bygone eras, challenging us to uncover the enigmas that will eternally linger around the lives of the remarkable individuals who once governed the course of civilization. The emperors who presided over the Roman realm for an astonishing span of 500 years, leaving legacies that will be forever etched in history. The vast stretch of the Roman Empire was a mosaic of diverse people and territories interconnected by roads and ruled by a single individual, the emperor. These rulers held the destinies of millions within their grasp, molding the trajectory of history with their caprices and flaws. Figures like Titus are commemorated for their benevolence and contributions to public infrastructure. Nevertheless, for every just leader, there existed others whose names resonate with infamy. Take Domitian, the younger progeny of Vespasian. While his father and sibling were celebrated for their military achievements and construction projects, Domitian's tenure was marked by brutality, suspicion, and delusions of grandeur. It's said he would spend long hours in solitude, obsessively capturing flies only to impale them with a needle. He demanded to be referred to as master and god. Any hint of disloyalty, whether real or imagined, could result in a death sentence. Senators in particular had ample reason to dread Domitian's volatile disposition. He reinstated the practice of treason trials, using them as a means to eliminate his adversaries and seize their riches. Even during his own banquets, the emperor couldn't resist asserting his dominance over life and death. According to the historian Suetonius, Domitian once hosted a banquet for a group of terrified senators, where everything, the decorations, the servers, the dishes, was black, reminiscent of a funeral feast. Each place setting was accompanied by a tombstone inscribed with the names of the guests. After a night filled with terror, the survivors were grateful to return home alive, only to discover that their tombstones were crafted from silver, an ironic gift from Domitian as a morbid party favor. Yet the reign of Domitian's tyranny couldn't endure indefinitely. In 96 AD, following a 15-year rule, he met his end through an assassination plot within the palace, stabbed by a servant while reaching for a concealed knife underneath his pillow in a chamber adorned with moonstone walls designed to prevent ambushes. This demise was a fitting conclusion for a despot plagued by paranoia. Thus the cycle continued, characterized by a succession of extraordinary leaders, leaving their imprint on an empire that stretched across continents and ages. Following Demian, a series of rulers emerged, collectively referred to as the Five. Good emperors, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Selected based on their capabilities rather than their lineage, they governed during a period of relative tranquility and prosperity from 96 AD to 180 AD. Nerva's time as emperor was short yet vital. Appointed by the Senate after the assassination of Domitian, this seasoned statesman endeavored to rectify his predecessor's wrongs and restore harmony between the emperor and the Senate. To guarantee a peaceful succession, Nerva adopted the esteemed General Trajan as his successor. Upon Nerva's death, after only 16 months in office, Trajan ascended to the throne with broad backing. Trajan is celebrated as a soldier emperor who expanded the empire to its largest territorial reach, with his conquests bringing immense wealth to Rome that financed a daring building initiative that transformed the city. Trajan's Column, a monument adorned with depictions of his military victories, still stands as a symbol of his renown and the Roman brilliance in engineering. Yet, Trajan was more than simply a conqueror. He was admired for his fairness, respect for the Senate, and generosity towards the impoverished. During his rule, Rome thrived both militarily and culturally. Trajan's influence marked an era of wealth and stability, representing a true golden age for the empire. Upon Trajan's death in 117 AD, his adopted son and designated heir, Hadrian, ascended to the throne. Like his predecessor, Hadrian had a military background, yet his passions extended far beyond warfare. He was an accomplished poet, philosopher, architect, and a globe-trotter. Throughout his 21-year reign, Hadrian spent over half of that time away from Italy, touring nearly every province of the empire. In stark contrast to the expansionist Trajan, Hadrian concentrated on fortifying and safeguarding Rome's expansive territories. In Britannia, he constructed a monumental wall that stretched across the island to fend off the northern barbarian tribes. In Judea, he fiercely quelled a Jewish uprising, forcing the survivors out of Jerusalem and reconstructing it as a Roman colony. Nevertheless, Hadrian is perhaps most celebrated for his architectural endeavors. A talented builder, he created temples, baths, and his vast villa complex located just outside Rome. His most renowned work was the Pantheon, an enormous domed structure that remains a testament to Roman engineering. Its oculus opens directly to the sky. Following in Trajan's footsteps, Hadrian similarly appointed his own successor, Antoninus Pius, a senator esteemed for his moral integrity and calm demeanor. Antoninus ruled benignly for 23 years, steering clear of military confrontations and prioritizing effective governance. Like Hadrian, he was also a builder and implemented laws to protect the rights of slaves, women, and minors. Under Antoninus, the empire experienced a phase of peace and prosperity. Agriculture thrived, trade routes remained stable, and provincial administration was efficient. The imperial historian Cassius Dio remarked, "The reign of Antoninus is renowned for the tranquility that enveloped the world, with not a single war initiated or waged." It was said that Antoninus prioritized the preservation of Rome over its expansion, a philosophy that would later lead to disappointment among his successors. When Antoninus passed away in 161 AD, authority shifted to his adopted heir, Marcus Aurelius, recognized as the final one among the 5 good emperors. Marcus represented a distinct type of leadership, embodying the philosopher-king archetype, as he sought to reconcile his responsibilities to the empire with his stoic principles of integrity and discipline. Growing up in the opulent imperial court, Marcus aimed to live simply, steering clear of indulgence while immersing himself in philosophical study. In his introspective writings, later known as the Meditations, he wrestled with enduring issues of ethics and existence. He reminded himself, "You could leave life at any moment. Let this awareness shape your actions, words, and thoughts." Yet despite his profound insights, Marcus couldn't evade the pressures of empire. His rule was characterized by near-constant conflict, as Rome's adversaries encroached upon its borders. In the east, Marcus engaged in a protracted campaign against the Parthian Empire, while in the north he fought for years against Germanic tribes along the Danube, a grueling struggle that strained both the military and the imperial finances. Additionally, a devastating epidemic, believed to be smallpox, swept through the realm in Marcus's later years, ravaging the population and disrupting everyday life. Nevertheless, the emperor persisted, exemplifying stoic resilience amid hardship. When he passed in 180 AD, he left an empire facing numerous obstacles yet still intact, a tribute to his resolute character. Marcus Aurelius's death marked the conclusion of the renowned golden age of the 5 good emperors. His son Commodus assumed power, a vain and volatile youth who was far more captivated by the arena than by governance. Commodus viewed himself as a gladiator, participating in and triumphing in countless matches before adoring crowds. However, behind the facade, he was a tyrannical and unpredictable leader, executing senators on a whim, striding through the imperial residence at night to hunt servants for entertainment, and even renaming Rome Colonia Commodiana after himself. His grand delusions knew no limits. Commodus proclaimed himself a deity, donning the guise of Hercules and insisting on being worshipped. Ultimately, Commodus became the target of a palace plot, being strangled in his bath by his wrestling companion. His demise in 192 marked the conclusion of the Nerva-Antonine dynasty and gave rise to a turbulent era known as the Year of the 5 Emperors. In rapid succession, 4 individuals, Pertinax, Didius Julianus, Pescennius Niger, and Clodius Albinus vied for the imperial throne, plunging the empire into civil conflict. From this bloody turmoil emerged Septimius Severus, a merciless general who seized control and established a new dynasty. Severus was deeply entrenched in military affairs, spending a significant portion of his reign engaged in campaigns to defend the empire. He achieved notable victories against the Parthians to the east and the rebellious tribes in Britain, extending Roman territories and fortifying the borders. However, Severus was not merely a conqueror. He was also a shrewd politician who sought to consolidate authority within the imperial court. He appointed loyal allies, many of whom were fellow Africans, to key roles while marginalizing the conventional aristocracy. Additionally, he sought the military's support by increasing their pay and bestowing other benefits to secure their allegiance. This focus on martial strength would come to characterize the Severan dynasty and foreshadow future challenges. Upon his death in 211 AD, while campaigning in Britain, Severus entrusted the empire to his sons Caracalla and Geta, offering the well-known counsel, "Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and disdain all other men." Unfortunately, this guidance would go unheeded. Caracalla and Geta, who had long harbored animosity toward one another, agreed to divide the empire, but their temporary peace was short-lived. Just a year following their father's passing, Caracalla had Geta killed in their mother's presence and initiated a bloody purge of his brother's supporters. As the sole emperor, Caracalla demonstrated himself to be a tyrannical and unpredictable ruler, reminiscent of Caligula or Nero. He became infamous for his arbitrary executions, indulgent lifestyle, and peculiar fascinations. Caracalla was obsessed with Alexander the Great, presenting himself as a new conqueror of the world. However, his military endeavors were mostly failures, severely depleting the imperial treasury. To sustain his lavish lifestyle, Caracalla increased taxes and devalued the currency. He also granted Roman citizenship to all freemen within the empire, a decision primarily aimed at broadening the tax revenue rather than any genuine commitment to equality. Ultimately, Caracalla's lavish behavior caught up to him. In 217 AD, he was murdered by a soldier while attending to nature by the roadside, a disgraceful end for such a flamboyant emperor. Thus the cycle persisted. A procession of extraordinary personalities left their imprint on an empire that spanned across continents and ages. Individuals such as Elagabalus are remembered for their outrageous excesses, the adolescent priest emperor, who shocked Rome with his exotic Eastern rituals and sexual behaviors. Others like Diocletian are acknowledged for their reforms, fragmenting the empire and initiating the tetrarchy to stabilize a faltering colossus. Meanwhile, figures such as Constantine shifted the tides of history, embracing Christianity and establishing a new Eastern capital. Throughout it all, the themes of power, ambition, and mortality appear prominently. The lives of the Roman emperors serve as a reminder of the transient nature of glory, the corruptive effects of unchecked power, and our ongoing intrigue with those who shaped the ancient world. Their narratives continue to enthrall us even centuries. After the collapse of the empire they governed, we now turn our attention to one of the most remarkable periods in Roman history, the rule of Commodus and the Severan dynasty. It was an era characterized by larger-than-life personalities, astonishing extravagance, and shocking brutality. The imperial palace transformed into a cauldron of intrigue, where power was violently claimed and fiercely protected. Emperors fully embraced their desires and indulgences, leaving everyday Romans astonished by their escapades. Our narrative starts with Commodus, the offspring and successor of the esteemed philosopher King Marcus Aurelius. Commodus had been brought up in a world of wealth and comfort, and his rise to the throne at just 18 years old promised a prosperous future for Rome. Unfortunately, that bright expectation would not materialize, for Commodus harbored a deadly obsession with the brutal spectacle of gladiatorial fights. He viewed himself as a deity clad in human form, the reincarnation of the legendary hero Hercules. The youthful emperor dedicated countless hours to weapon training and arena competitions, eliciting horror from the Senate and amusement from the populace. He fought under the moniker Hercules Reborn, mercilessly dispatching exotic animals and unfortunate criminals with reckless abandon. The displays were simultaneously captivating and repulsive. Rumors circulated that the emperor had lost his sanity. Yet within his apparent madness, a purpose existed. By presenting himself as a godlike figure, Commodus aimed to elevate his position beyond the trivial squabbles of the Senate. He insisted on being revered as a living god, and those who dared to refuse faced severe repercussions. The Senate, intimidated into compliance, could only observe as Commodus reveled in his twisted fantasies. His excesses knew no limits. He hosted extravagant feasts where guests feasted on peculiar dishes like ostrich brains and flamingo tongues. He filled his private quarters with golden and silver statues of himself in heroic stances, He went so far as to rename Rome in his honor, declaring it the colony of Commodus. The empire's treasury was drained to fund his lavish lifestyle, pushing it to the brink of insolvency. Yet perhaps the most disturbing aspect was Commodus's sadistic cruelty. He took immense pleasure in personally executing offenders in horrific and inventive manners. Once he had an unfortunate citizen tossed into the arena to be devoured by wild beasts for merely yawning during one of his speeches. He commanded the torture and execution of anyone he deemed a threat, including his own relatives. Such a reign of terror could not endure indefinitely. In 192 AD, after over 10 years of disastrous rule, Commodus was ultimately toppled by a conspiracy from within his close circle. His mistress, Marcia, fearing for her own safety, secretly added poison to his wine. When that attempt failed, an athlete named Narcissus was dispatched to strangle the emperor while he bathed. The Senate celebrated the news of Commodus's demise, labeling him a public enemy and mandating the destruction of his statues. However, their satisfaction was short-lived. The Praetorian Guard, having grown accustomed to the lavish lifestyle of Commodus, resented the Senate's attempts to regain authority. They put the throne up for auction, selling it to the highest bidder. The winning bid came from a wealthy senator named Didius Julianus, who promised significant bonuses to each soldier in return for their backing. Yet his rule was fated for failure from the outset. The citizens of Rome, appalled by the blatant corruption, revolted. Rival generals in the provinces declared themselves emperors and advanced on the capital, plunging the empire into civil war. Ultimately, it was Septimius Severus, a cunning and merciless commander from the Balkans, who claimed victory. He executed Didius Julianus and cleansed the Senate of his adversaries, filling its ranks with his own loyal followers. He also showered the military with attention, increasing their pay and providing generous gifts, securing their steadfast loyalty. Under Septimius Severus, the empire experienced a phase of relative stability and growth. He initiated grand building projects, including the impressive Arch of Septimius Severus in central Rome. He expanded the empire's borders, conquering Mesopotamia from the Parthians while securing the frontiers in Britain and Africa. However, while he brought renown to Rome, Septimius Severus was also planting the seeds of future turmoil. He enhanced the military's authority and status, creating a perilous precedent for his successors. Additionally, he dealt with serious challenges at home from his two sons, Caligula and Geta. The brothers had been fierce adversaries since childhood, driven by jealousy and animosity. Their father had foolishly chosen to name them joint heirs to the throne, paving the way for an intense struggle for power. Caligula, the elder sibling, was a vicious and erratic tyrant reminiscent of Commodus. Geta, the younger, was more rational yet equally driven. Following Septimius Severus's death in 201 AD, the brothers co-ruled briefly as emperors. This uneasy alliance was plagued by incessant squabbling and threats of violence. They partitioned the imperial palace into distinct fortified sections, and seldom appeared in public together due to fears of assassination attempts. The tense situation finally exploded into violence during a gathering arranged by their mother, Julia Domna. Caligula's assassins stormed in and murdered Geta in cold blood as he clung helplessly to his mother's garments. Caligula ultimately became the sole ruler of the Roman Empire, his hands marked with his brother's blood. To reinforce his hold on power, Caligula initiated a reign of terror that surpassed even Commodus's notorious excesses. He executed thousands of G supporters, including numerous influential senators and generals. He even arranged for the assassination of his own wife for daring to mourn his brother's death. The emperor's paranoia knew no limits. Like Commodus before him, Caligula sought to validate his rule through extravagant displays of power and divinity. He portrayed himself as the new Alexander the Great, waging bloody campaigns in the East. Additionally, he extended Roman citizenship to all free men within the empire, a decision that diminished the privileges of the noble class and increased the number of taxpayers. Yet beneath his bravado, Caligula was a profoundly disturbed individual. He was continually haunted by nightmares and visions of his slain brother, leading to a growing erraticism in his behavior. In 217 AD, while on his journey to the east, he met his end at the hands of a disgruntled soldier during a roadside restroom break. The empire exhaled in relief. Caracal's demise marked the beginning of a tumultuous era known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. In the following 50 years, over 20 emperors would ascend and fall rapidly, most meeting violent deaths at the hands of their own troops. The empire was besieged by invasions from outside forces, economic decline and social unrest on a scale unseen since the Republic's downfall. Amidst this chaos, an unexpectedly peculiar individual momentarily took the imperial throne. His name was Elagabalus, who was merely 14 years old when the Syrian legions declared him emperor. The young boy had previously served as a priest of the sun god in Amsa and brought along his unusual and exotic religious rituals to Rome. Elagabalus was truly one of a kind, a flamboyant and effeminate figure who reveled in breaking traditions. He adorned himself with makeup and feminine attire, marrying and divorcing several women and men in rapid succession. In a shocking act of sacrilege that outraged Roman society, he even took a Vestal virgin as his wife. The teenage emperor's sexual escapades became legendary, as he was said to host extravagant orgies in the imperial palace, choosing partners based on the size of their genitals. He also had a penchant for opulent banquets, where he served rare delicacies like camel, heels and flamingo brains. Nevertheless, Elagabalus's most infamous act was his endeavor to elevate his Syrian sun god to the pinnacle of the Roman pantheon. He constructed an impressive temple on Palatine Hill and commanded the transfer of sacred relics from other deities to this location, which included the ancient statue of Cybele and the flame of Vesta. This decision infuriated the traditional Roman priesthood and created a rift with the general populace. Elagabalus's brief rule was characterized by scandal, extravagance, and religious strife. He quickly lost favor with the Praetorian Guard, who disliked his foreign customs and effeminate demeanor. In 222 AD, after only 4 years in power, Elagabalus was assassinated by his own troops, and his remains were unceremoniously discarded in the Tiber River like trash. The narrative of Elagabalus serves as a warning about the threats posed by unchecked authority and the boundaries of tolerance within Roman culture. The empire had seen its share of odd and immoral leaders, yet even they paid at least some respect to the conventional gods and principles of Rome. Elagabalus's blatant acceptance of Eastern opulence and sexual fluidity pushed the limits for the conservative Roman aristocracy. As we consider the turbulent reigns of Commodus, Caracalla, and Elagabalus, it's tempting to view them as anomalies arising from a decadent and declining empire. However, in many respects, they represented the inevitable result of centuries of absolute power concentrated in a single ruler. The Roman emperors were perceived as divine beings on earth, answerable only to themselves. It's no surprise that some were captivated by the seductive nature of their own godlike status. Nevertheless, even in the depths of imperial extravagance, there were signs of hope and resilience. The Roman citizens persevered as they always had, finding comfort in their families, communities, and faith. The empire would endure through the crises of the 3rd century and eventually experience a revival of stability under strong leaders such as Diocletian and Constantine. But that's a tale for another time. For the time being, we part ways with the infamous, reckless, and perilous emperors of Rome, confident that their tales will continue to both intrigue and horrify us for many ages ahead. Much like the vast empire they governed, their impact is intricate and lasting, serving as a reflection of the pinnacles of human accomplishment and the trenches of human wickedness. As we drift off to sleep, we envision scenes of ancient splendor and excess swirling in our minds, thankful for the stable and tranquil lives we enjoy today. As highlighted, the existence of the Roman emperors was rife with enough scandal, brutality, and intrigue to outshine even the most sensational contemporary dramas. But if you believe that the outrageous exploits of Caligula, Nero, and Commodus epitomized imperial infamy, buckle up. We are merely scratching the surface. Following the assassination of Commodus in 192 AD, The empire plunged into a tumultuous frenzy known as the Year of the Five Emperors. Within a brief period of mere months, a whirlwind of rulers claimed the imperial title, only to be dispatched by the next ambitious commander with troops at his disposal. Kicking things off was Pertinax, a well-regarded senator and city prefect. Unfortunately, his reform attempts did not sit well with the pampered Praetorian Guard. After a mere 86 days, Pertinax met a grim fate within his palace at the hands of a faction of disgruntled guards. In a shocking twist, the Praetorians later auctioned off the imperial position to the highest bidder. A wealthy senator named Didius Julianus secured the dubious honor for the extravagant sum of 25,000 sesterces per man. However, his reign was destined to be cut short. Three notable generals stationed in the provinces, Pescennius Niger in Syria, Clodius Albinus in Britain, and Septimius Severus in Pannonia, refused to accept Julianus's claim and launched their own power grabs. Through a mix of tactical acumen, military strength, and sheer fortune, Severus emerged as the victor. He managed to secure the capitulation of Albinus's significantly larger forces, subsequently decimating Niger's troops through a succession of fierce confrontations. Septimius Severus, originally from North Africa, would reign for an impressive 18 years, founding a new imperial line. A shrewd strategist, he emerged as one of the more capable emperors, fortifying the borders and enhancing infrastructure. Yet, like many before him, Severus struggled to tame the influence of the military. On his deathbed, he famously urged his sons to enrich the soldiers while disregarding everyone else. This counsel would later haunt the empire, as Severus's offspring, Caracalla and Geta, quickly descended into a brutal rivalry after jointly inheriting the throne in 211. Caracalla, whose official likenesses often featured a permanent scowl, was anything but personable. Nevertheless, he held a particular affinity for the military, granting Roman citizenship to all free men across the empire in order to tax them and boost soldiers' pay. He also exhibited megalomaniacal tendencies, likening himself to a second Alexander the Great while leading military campaigns against the Germans and Parthians. In a grim twist of fate, Caracalla met his demise during one of these campaigns, being stabbed by a disillusioned soldier while relieving himself on the roadside. The ensuing decade witnessed a recurring cycle of fleeting soldier emperors. However, the situation took a truly peculiar turn with the emergence of Elagabalus in 218. Only 14 years old when proclaimed emperor by the legions in Syria, Elagabalus served as the high priest for the Assyrian sun god, engaging in an array of scandalous religious rites and sexual escapades. If the stories hold any weight, Elagabalus epitomized the ultimate rebellious adolescent, throwing extravagant orgies, marrying a sacred Vestal virgin, and even resorting to prostitution within the imperial palace. Unsurprisingly, Elagabalus's outrageous behavior soon lost its charm. After only 4 years, the Praetorian Guard grew tired and assassinated the young emperor along with his overbearing mother. His remains were unceremoniously discarded into the Tiber River. In a final act of humiliation, the Senate instituted a decree of damnatio memoriae, striving to obliterate Elagabalus from history. The imperial throne then shifted to Elagabalus's more conventional cousin, Alexander Severus. However, after a 13-year reign that prioritized diplomacy over military conquests, Alexander too fell prey to a soldier revolt. He was brutally killed, alongside his mother at a camp on the Rhine frontier, marking the mid-3rd century as the period known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. This era was characterized by economic instability, invasions from barbarian tribes, and an astonishing 26 emperors in just 50 years. With the borders under siege from Germanic invasions and the Persian Sassanids, power frequently shifted to military leaders. Rulers such as Maximinus Thrax, Philip the Arab, and Decius spent little time in Rome, concentrating their efforts on defending against invasions, often at the cost of their lives. Decius was killed in combat against the Goths in 251, while 8 years later, Emperor Valerian was captured in battle by the Persian king Shapur I, representing an unprecedented disgrace. It's understandable that many Romans feared the empire was on the verge of collapse, Yet just when it appeared all was lost, an unlikely hero emerged in the form of Diocletian, a common soldier from the Balkans. Ascending to power in 284 following the usual cycle of coups and civil strife, Diocletian implemented a series of comprehensive administrative reforms intended to stabilize the empire. Notably, he divided leadership among 4 co-emperors in a system called the Tetrarchy. Although not a permanent fix, the Tetrarchy succeeded in pushing back the worst of the invasions and provided the beleaguered empire with a measure of recovery. The final biography of our emperors features one of Rome's most significant leaders, Constantine the Great. Born in the province of Moesia to a tetrarch father, Constantine began his career as an adept general and administrator. His life, however, changed dramatically in 312, when just before a significant battle against a rival emperor, he allegedly experienced a vision of a cross in the sky accompanied by the words, "In this sign conquer." Interpreting this as a sign of divine favor, Constantine emerged victorious in that battle and subsequently issued the Edict of Milan, which granted Christianity legal recognition within the empire. In the years to follow, he increasingly supported Christianity, constructing magnificent churches, convening the Council of Nicaea to address theological disagreements, and even postponing his baptism until he was on his deathbed. The reasons behind Constantine's religious policies are still the subject of much debate, but there is no denying the significant influence his adoption of Christianity had on the trajectory of Western civilization. Additionally, Constantine is noted for founding a new imperial capital in the East, Constantinople, also known as the New Rome. Established on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, Constantinople would become a stronghold of Roman power for over a millennium after the decline of the Western Empire. So there you have it, a rapid overview of some of the most shocking, violent, and simply strange events in the lives of Roman emperors. From the murderous outbursts of Caligula and Commodus to the grandiosity of Nero and Caracalla, these rulers possessed absolute power and frequently gave in to their basest instincts. Yet the empire persisted, in large part due to reformers like Diocletian and astute political figures like Augustus and Constantine. The sagas of the emperors essentially narrate the story of Rome itself, a vast and intricate entity marked by tensions and contradictions, capable of both extreme cruelty and remarkable achievement. Despite their numerous shortcomings, the emperors left an enduring legacy on history, one that remains evident in our art, architecture, and legal systems, which form the foundation of much of the contemporary world. Above all, their experiences serve as a warning about the insidious effects of power. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca, who observed the machinations of the imperial court while advising Nero, poignantly stated, "All power is bound to be a burden. All preeminence must be an affliction when a man knows himself." These are wise thoughts, even for those of us who are unlikely to ever grapple with the notion of being deemed a living deity. And with these sobering insights, we reach the conclusion of our evening exploration into the lives and eras of the Roman emperors. From Augustus to Constantine, we've witnessed the zenith of Roman influence and grandeur, along with the nadir of human moral failing, the debauchery, treachery, and violence that frequently lingered just beneath the imperial surface. As your consciousness begins to drift into the realms of dreams, perhaps you'll catch a fleeting vision of the eternal city in all its rich beauty and profound decay. The splendid marble temples and blood-soaked arenas, the extravagant palaces and the smoke-choked alleys. If in your mind's eye you chance upon a regal figure navigating through the mist, adorned in a purple-trimmed toga and a laurel wreath, take a moment to reflect on the burdens that accompany absolute power and the all-too-human flaws of even the most formidable leaders. Yet it is time to say farewell to the emperors and their empire. The Sandman beckons and the soft embrace of sleep awaits. So let us gently whisper a soft Ave at Cavall to Augustus, Constantine, and all who ruled in between. Hail and farewell, rulers of Rome. May your legendary tales resonate through the corridors of history. Good night. The reign of Diocletian marked a pivotal transformation in the framework and administration of the Roman Empire. Acknowledging the difficulties inherent in governing such an expansive territory alone, Diocletian instituted a fresh approach to leadership known as the tetrarchy, or rule of four. Under this system, authority was to be divided among two senior emperors, known as the Augusti, and their two junior partners, the Caesars. Diocletian took command of the eastern territories and appointed his longtime ally Maximian as the Augustus of the West. Each Augustus would have a Caesar to act as both assistant and heir. While this arrangement appeared effective on paper, personal ambitions would eventually dismantle Diocletian's grand vision. For a period, the Tetrarchy did succeed in providing some stability to an empire that had been battered by invasions and internal conflict. All four rulers, including Diocletian, hailed from humble beginnings and had ascended through the ranks due to their intelligence and resilience, bringing that same pragmatic approach to governing the empire. Diocletian, in particular, was a perceptive and methodical leader who restructured the complex administrative apparatus of the empire and aimed to regulate the chaotic Roman currency. Always mindful of appearances, he crafted an image of distant divinity surrounding the imperial position. Those who came to him were required to bow in a ritual known as adoratio, a practice adapted from the Persian court. Despite his many accomplishments, Diocletian is perhaps most infamous for his fervent persecution of Christians. Unlike previous emperors who had sporadically targeted the group, Diocletian resolved to extinguish it completely. He commanded the destruction of churches, the burning of scriptures, and the arrest of clergy. Christians were removed from public office, and thousands faced execution. Yet the faith persisted. Ironically, it was one of Diocletian's tetrarchic successors who would repeal his policies and dramatically alter the empire's spiritual landscape. As he felt the burden of governance increasingly weigh on him, Diocletian made a choice almost unheard of in Roman history. He willingly abdicated the throne in 305 AD. In separate ceremonies orchestrated by Diocletian himself, he and Maximian officially stepped down from their positions and entrusted the leadership to their Caesars. Constantius and Galerius were now elevated to the role of Augusti, yet their respective sons, Constantine and Maxentius, were overlooked for advancement in favor of two other individuals, Zeus and Maximus Dia. This setup was a breeding ground for dynastic intrigue that would soon boil over following Diocletian's retirement. The Tetrarchy continued as Constantius campaigned in Britain with his son Constantine accompanying him. Upon Constantius's death in York in 306, his soldiers immediately proclaimed Constantine as Augustus, throwing the imperial college into chaos. Galerius, the senior Augustus, extended an offer to Constantine for the lesser title of Caesar. Nevertheless, Constantine accepted this arrangement while secretly aiming to solidify his claim to greater authority. Events unfolded rapidly thereafter. Maxentius, the son of the retired emperor Maximian, revolted in Rome and declared himself emperor. Maximian soon joined forces with him, reclaiming his previous imperial title. The Western Empire was engulfed in civil war as Constantine, Maximian, Maxentius, and Zeus plotted against one another. Through a combination of political strategy, betrayal, and military skill, Constantine ultimately emerged as the dominant figure. He accepted the surrender of his rival Maximian, but later pushed him to suicide when he conspired against Constantine. More dramatically, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine defeated Maxentius's forces and reported a miraculous vision prior to the engagement that would alter history's course. He claimed to have seen a cross of light in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In this sign conquer." Inspired by this vision, he instructed his soldiers to mark their shields with the Chi-Rho, the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek. Constantine secured victory in battle and entered Rome as its liberator, but this triumph carried significant spiritual repercussions. While various accounts differ regarding the specifics of his conversion, it is clear that Constantine adopted Christianity as his central faith from that moment onward. Teaming up with his eastern counterpart Licinius, he promulgated the Edict of Milan in 313, which established religious tolerance and ceased the persecution of Christians. This groundbreaking act aligned the empire with the formerly reviled sect, paving the way for Christianity's eventual supremacy. In 324, Constantine solidified his power by defeating Licinius and re-establishing the empire under his singular control. He introduced a distinctly Christian order, as exemplified by his new capital, Constantinople. Built on the ancient grounds of Byzantium, overlooking the Bosphorus, Constantine created a new Roma city filled with churches rather than pagan temples. The era of Constantine the Great marks a pivotal moment in Roman history, as significant as any other. The unwavering faith that Diocletian had attempted to extinguish now enjoyed the official backing of the empire. The Roman Empire was forever changed. As Constantine's city thrived in the east, its historic counterpart, Rome, entered a prolonged decline. The epicenter of power had decisively shifted eastward, leading to the gradual fade of the old Roman pantheon. An emperor would reign again in the west, though not from Rome and not for an extended period. The last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic leader Odoacer in 476, marking the quiet fall of the Western Roman Empire. After an extraordinary span of about 500 years from Augustus to Augustulus, this grand narrative of its ascension and demise continues to fascinate and resonate with contemporary times. The scandalous antics of emperors like Caligula and Nero remain shocking and intriguing. The stoic insights of Marcus Aurelius continue to motivate. The world-altering decrees of Constantine still echo throughout history. Within these larger-than-life figures, we observe traits that are both commendable and repugnant, often coexisting in the same individual. What is it about these ancient rulers that continues to capture our interest and ignite our imagination? It might stem from a dark fascination with humanity's capacity for both extraordinary accomplishment and profound depravity. These emperors were, after all, real men, despite their immense power, dealing with many of the same core challenges we confront. What defines a life well lived? What makes for effective governance? What creates a legacy worthy of remembrance? Ultimately, the structures they established outlasted their own lives. The empire, which served as the backdrop for their conquests and indulgences, evolved into something far greater than any individual. Its laws, languages, and arts have profoundly influenced the world for countless generations. For better or worse, we still exist under the influence of Rome. Thus, as we peer back through the ages at the lives of the Caesars, we are, in a sense, gazing into a distant reflection, one that reveals the breadth of humanity in all its intricate beauty and turmoil. The passage of time may obscure their names, yet their tales will never be completely silenced. They remain intertwined with us, and we with them. As long as we experience that pull towards our history, the Roman emperors will not rest quietly. In death, we will keep them restlessly and excitingly present in our thoughts and dreams, a restless aspect of our historical essence. As we have seen, Nero's reign represented a tumultuous and transformative chapter for the Roman Empire. His death in 68 AD threw Rome into disarray and civil strife, leading to a tumultuous period widely recognized as the Year of the Four Emperors. Following Nero's fall, the empire was on the edge of disintegration. Competing claimants for the throne emerged, each supported by their own factions and legions. The first to stake a claim for power was Galba, the governor of Hispania. A stern and aged disciplinarian, Galba was known for his harshness and avarice, which swiftly undermined any early backing he had. As tensions rose in the capital, the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite protectors, shifted their loyalty to Otho, a former associate of Nero. Otho had enjoyed a close friendship with Nero, indulging in the extravagances and debauchery of his court. However, he lost favor when Nero became infatuated with Otho's wife, Pompeia Sabina. Consequently, Nero exiled Otho to govern the remote province of Lusitania. Otho harbored resentment over this betrayal. Seizing the opportunity amidst the unrest, he attracted the Praetorians with extravagant bribes and enticing promises. In a rapid coup, they proclaimed Otho as emperor and assassinated Galba in the Roman Forum just months into his rule. Yet Otho's celebration of victory was fleeting. Throughout the empire, the legions were restless, showing little allegiance to the disgraced Nero or his allies. In Germania, the ambitious governor Vitellius had already been declared emperor by his soldiers. Now two rival emperors were on a collision course towards war, threatening to drench Italy in blood. Vitellius was a veteran leader known for his insatiable hunger for both food and power. Obese and coarse, he advanced on Rome with a powerful army, his soldiers pillaging the countryside as they moved. Otho set out to face Vitellius, but his smaller force was decisively defeated at the Battle of Bedriacum. Choosing not to prolong the civil war, Otho took his own life, allowing Vitellius to enter Rome unopposed as the third emperor. In this tumultuous year, Vitellius worked to solidify his control through a spree of indulgence and brutality. He hosted sumptuous banquets, indulging in rare delicacies, while his praetorians wreaked havoc across the city. Officials and nobles who had supported his rivals were swiftly executed. The erratic cruelty and gluttony associated with Vitellius's reign became legendary. The outraged populace quickly branded him the glutton and came to despise their new emperor. Meanwhile, in the eastern provinces, a new contender was gaining strength. Titus Flavius Vespasian, commonly referred to as Vespasian, was a seasoned general recently returned from quelling the Jewish rebellion in Judea. With respect from his troops and proximity to the critical grain supplies of Egypt, Vespasian posed a serious threat. As news of Vitellius's vile excesses circulated, Vespasian's legions urged him to ascend to the throne. Delegating the ongoing conflict in Judea to his son Titus, Vespasian advanced west toward Italy, where his forces engaged Vitellius's army in a second battle of Bedriacum. This time the Flavian faction triumphed, routing the Vitellian forces and paving the way to Rome. Amidst the chaos of the civil war engulfing the capital, a frightened Vitellius attempted to resign and slip away, unnoticed. However, enraged soldiers and civilians seized the disgraced emperor, dragging him through the streets, torturing and humiliating him, before ultimately dismembering him. Thus, the year of the four emperors drew to a close with Vespasian's victorious march through the blood-drenched streets of Rome to claim the imperial throne. The Flavian dynasty, which would govern for 27 years, had commenced, yet the memories of the preceding anarchy would remain. The empire had barely survived. This brutal contest for power, torn apart by ambition, betrayal, and violence. Although the Pax Romana would largely return under Vespasian and his descendants, the toll of civil war would leave a lasting impact on Roman politics for years to come. Vespasian proved to be an effective and stabilizing leader whose practicality and consistent governance were a refreshing change from the madness of Nero and the turmoil of the intervening period. Originating from an unremarkable background, Vespasian had ascended through the military ranks due to his reputation as a shrewd and brave commander. Now, he applied his down-to-earth approach to an empire in disarray. One of Vespasian's immediate objectives was to rectify the government's drained finances. The lavish spending of Nero, the upheavals of civil strife, and a severe economic decline had nearly driven Rome into bankruptcy. Vespasian introduced new taxes, including the infamous levy on urine gathered from public restrooms for leather tanning. When his son Titus expressed disgust over the nature of this tax, Vespasian famously raised a coin and joked, "Punia non let," money does not stink. This kind of down-to-earth humor exemplified Vespasian's character. He largely rejected the extravagance and luxury in which his predecessors had indulged. While he did construct the Grand Flavian Amphitheatre, also known as the Colosseum, his motivations included enhancing employment opportunities and gaining public favor. Unlike the self-absorbed rulers of the past, Vespasian appeared to grasp the significance of providing bread and circuses to placate the Roman populace. Additionally, he aimed to reinstate traditional Roman morals and religious rituals that had suffered during the neglectful and irreverent reigns of prior emperors. He revitalized ancient priesthoods and reconstructed the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, which had been ravaged during civil turmoil. As a conservative Italian, Vespasian valued propriety and piety as vital elements for a stable society. Nonetheless, he was not above engaging in the ruthless power dynamics associated with imperial leadership. He dealt harshly with any signs of dissent from the Senate or disobedient legions. According to the gossipy historian Suetonius, Vespasian reportedly cried at the execution of two supposed conspirators while continuing to enjoy his dinner. Yet, in comparison to many emperors, Vespasian emerges as a relatively just and clear-headed leader who initiated the restoration of a battered empire. When he fell ill in 79 AD, Vespasian quipped that he was becoming a god, poking fun at the common deification of deceased emperors. Then, as he struggled to rise, he gasped, "An emperor should die standing," before taking his final breath. The empire would never achieve complete security or tranquility, yet under Vespasian's firm leadership, it experienced a much-needed reprieve from the follies and excesses of the Julio-Claudian era. This created an opportunity for his elder son, Titus, to ascend to the throne and carry on the Flavian dynasty's mission of stabilizing and enhancing a Roman world still shaken by the chaos of its recent history. While more disasters and insanity would periodically disrupt the foundations of imperial authority, Vespasian's steadfast military virtues had steadied the state, paving the way for a new period of relative peace and prosperity across the vast Roman Empire. As we've noted, early Roman emperors from Augustus to Nero established a benchmark for both magnificence and moral decay that would typify the leaders of this great empire. However, anyone who believed the turmoil might cease with the end of the Julio-Claudians was gravely mistaken. What ensued was an epoch marked by such disorder and turmoil that it's remarkable Rome endured at all. In 69 AD, following Nero's startling suicide, the empire found itself adrift, lacking direction in a turbulent sea of uncertainty. Within mere months, 4 different men would claim the title of emperor, each seizing power through a barrage of violence and treachery, only to be swiftly eliminated by the next contender. The first to make a move was Galba, a battle-worn general who marched on Rome with his legions, intent on reinstating order and discipline in an empire that had become indulgent and corrupt during Nero's reign. Yet Galba was not the hero Rome had yearned for. Frugal, uptight, and entirely devoid of charm, he rapidly alienated the Senate, the populace, and most critically his own soldiers, who had anticipated substantial rewards for their loyalty. Just 6 months after he assumed command, Galba was savagely killed by his own Praetorian Guard, who had shifted their allegiance to a rival contender named Otho, an elegant nobleman with a taste for luxury. Otho had previously been a close ally of Nero, partaking in the emperor's extravagant pleasures, and rumors even suggested he shared his bed. However, as Nero's power began to wane, the shrewd Otho seized the opportunity to claim the throne for himself. For a fleeting moment, it appeared that Otho's bold move had paid off. Acclaimed as emperor by the Praetorians, he entered Rome in victory, pledging to restore the glory days of public entertainment and ample provisions. Unfortunately for Otho, his reign would prove even shorter than Galba's. Meanwhile, out in the provinces, another aspirant was amassing his forces. Vitellius was a man similarly entrenched in courtly life, preferring the opulence of banquets over the rigors of war. Nonetheless, his lack of military skill was more than compensated for by his audacious ambition. Backed by legions in Germany, Vitellius advanced towards Rome, his numbers swelling as soldiers and locals rallied to his call. When the two armies clashed at the Battle of Bedriacum, it became a massacre. Vitellius's troops, battle-hardened from years of conflict at the empire's borders, swiftly overpowered Otho's Praetorian Guard, who fled before the onslaught. Faced with inevitable defeat, Otho committed suicide, leaving Vitellius as the last person standing in the bloody battle for the throne. Yet, if Vitellius believed his struggles had come to an end, he was gravely mistaken. As he reveled in his victory with an extravagant celebration, news arrived in Rome of yet another rival. Arising from the east, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, known simply as Vespasian, was everything Vitellius was not: a seasoned general, an astute politician, and a man of impeccable integrity. With the legions from Syria and Judea at his command, Vespasian initiated his own advance on the capital, resolved to end the turmoil and bring stability back to the empire. This led to a year of fierce civil war as Vespasian and Vitellius battled for dominion over Rome itself. As his grip on power weakened and fear took Old Vitellius entrenched himself in the imperial palace, while his forces ravaged and incinerated their way across Italy. Ultimately, there could only be one champion. In December of 69 AD, Vespasian's forces breached Rome's defenses, charging into the palace and dragging the terrified Vitellius into the streets, where he was beaten and strangled before being thrown into the Tiber. Thus commenced the era of Vespasian, the first ruler of a new dynasty that would rejuvenate the stagnant empire. With humble beginnings, he had ascended through military ranks due to his unwavering perseverance and tenacity, introducing much-needed common sense and stability to the imperial position. He reduced taxes, tackled corruption, and initiated an ambitious public works agenda, which included the construction of the renowned Colosseum, a lasting symbol of his legacy. Yet, perhaps Vespasian's most significant accomplishment was the revitalization of the empire's finances, drained by years of conflict and extravagant spending. Always practical, Vespasian resorted to a bit of creative accounting to replenish the imperial treasury. When his son Titus lamented the foul smell from the public latrines, Vespasian reportedly held up a coin and wittily stated, "Money doesn't stink." This saying was emblematic of a ruler who, during his decade in power, achieved more for the empire's stability and strength than any leader since Augustus. Upon his death in 79 AD, he left behind a secure and flourishing realm for his eldest son Titus, who would prove to be a capable successor in his own right. Yet, as is frequently the case in Roman history, triumph was soon succeeded by tragedy. Titus, celebrated as the victor of the Jewish War, reigned for barely 2 years before a mysterious illness took his life, passing the throne to his younger brother Domitian. With Domitian's rise, the shadows that had long haunted the empire began to resurface, akin to a disease that could never be completely eradicated. Domitian was a ruler enshrouded in suspicion and paranoia, perceiving threats and plots lurking everywhere. He governed with a heavy hand, mercilessly purging the Senate of anyone he deemed a danger and executing numerous both real and imagined traitors. No one in his family was exempt from his ire. When suspicions arose about his wife's fidelity, he had her exiled and her supposed lover executed in public view. Despite his brutal reign, Domitian was not without redeeming qualities. An adept administrator and a supporter of the arts, he presided over an era of relative stability and growth, expanding the empire's borders and initiating an extensive building campaign that rivaled even those of his father. The palace he constructed on the Palatine Hill, adorned with soaring domes and dazzling mosaics, became an ancient wonder, showcasing the splendor and magnificence of Rome at its zenith. Yet while he reveled in his accomplishments, Domitian could not evade the rising discontent brewing against him. His brutality and egotism had instigated the animosity of the senatorial elite, who viewed him as a tyrant, akin to Nero or Caligula. Ultimately, when a group of dissatisfied courtiers conspired to assassinate him in 96 AD, few mourned his death. Thus, the Flavian dynasty met its demise, snuffed out in its prime by the very chaos and violence it had intended to control. The influence of Vespasian and his offspring would resonate long beyond their passing, laying the groundwork for a fresh period of wealth and stability that would later be termed the Golden Age of the Roman Empire. As dawn broke over Rome's 7 hills on September 19, 96 AD, the atmosphere was charged with whispers and speculation throughout the city. Word of Domitian's assassination had spread rapidly, with crowds gathering in quiet conversations to ponder the implications for the empire's future. Inside the Senate House, there was a sense of cautious hope. For years, the senators had found themselves frustrated under Domitian's oppressive regime, witnessing as he stripped away their power and self-respect. Now, with the emperor deceased and no obvious successor in sight, they perceived an opportunity to reclaim their influence and guide the helm of governance towards their own vision. Yet, as they engaged in discussions and strategizing, another candidate for the throne was already preparing to make his move. Marcus Coccus Nerva, an elderly senator known for his noble lineage and unassailable character, had outlasted the rule of some of Rome's most infamous emperors by maintaining a low profile. With the support of his fellow senators and the Praetorian Guard, Nerva stepped forward to claim the imperial purple. This was a daring choice, fraught with peril. At his age, many questioned if he possessed the vigor or resolve to hold the empire together during such tumultuous times. Nonetheless, the new emperor proved more than capable. Over a brief 16-month tenure, Nerva dedicated himself to repairing the harm caused by Domitian's reign, abolishing harsh laws, recalling exiled dissenters, and restoring the Senate's traditional rights and privileges. Perhaps his most visionary accomplishment was his decision to adopt an heir, fully aware that his time was limited, and he had no children of his own. Not from his own lineage or immediate advisors, but rather from the ranks of the most esteemed generals within the empire. The individual he selected was Marcus Iulius Trajanus, more commonly recognized in history as Trajan. This decision was a brilliant example of political strategy. By appointing Trajan as his heir, Nerva guaranteed a seamless and tranquil transfer of authority while effectively communicating to the military that their needs would be prioritized under the upcoming administration. Upon Nerva's passing in January of 98 AD, Trajan was poised to ascend to power, heralding a new chapter of conquest and splendor for the Roman Empire. Right from the start of his reign, Trajan demonstrated himself as a leader of unmatched vigor and ambition. A soldier at heart, he quickly initiated a series of campaigns that would extend the empire's boundaries to their furthest reaches in history. In the northern territories, he conquered the troublesome Dacian tribes, integrating their land into a new province of Rome. To the east, he led his legions all the way to the Persian Gulf, defeating the robust forces of the Parthian Empire and seizing the ancient cities of Babylon and Ctesiphon for Rome. Yet Trajan wasn't solely a conqueror. He was also a builder and a forward thinker. He recognized that the true strength of an empire lies not only in its military, but also in the prosperity and welfare of its citizens. Wherever he traveled, Trajan left behind an impressive array of public works. Aqueducts, bridges, temples, and theaters, all showcasing the unmistakable brilliance and creativity of Roman architecture. In Rome, the emperor invested his newfound riches into an extensive urban renewal initiative, constructing an expansive forum named in his honor and erecting a towering column to celebrate his victories. The markets and granaries he established secured a consistent food supply for the bustling population, while his baths and gymnasiums offered a much-needed escape from everyday worries. Under Trajan's firm leadership, the empire experienced an uncommon era of tranquility and affluence, a golden age wherein art and literature thrived, and the limits of human understanding were significantly expanded. It was a time when possibilities seemed endless, and the vision of a world united under Roman rule appeared nearer than ever before. Nonetheless, even the most esteemed emperors must eventually depart this world. In 117 AD, Trajan fell ill during a campaign in the east. As he lay on his deathbed in the city of Selinus, he appointed his cousin and lifelong ally Hadrian as his successor, passing the torch of governance to a man who would become one of the most extraordinary rulers in Roman history. Hadrian was a multifaceted individual full of contrasts, a soldier and a scholar, a poet and a philosopher, a builder as well as a dreamer. He was an unsettled spirit, one who traversed the far reaches of his empire far more than he did the city of Rome itself. From Britain to Egypt, from Greece to Judea, Hadrian traveled incessantly, leaving his influence on every land he encountered. In Britain, he commissioned the construction of a massive wall to delineate the northern boundary of Roman lands, an engineering marvel that still stands as a testament to the empire's ambition and extent. In Athens, he oversaw a cultural resurgence, funding the creation of magnificent new temples and supporting the era's greatest intellects. Conversely, in Judea, he brutally quelled a Jewish uprising, garnering the hatred of a people who would remember him as a ruthless and merciless tyrant. Despite his numerous accomplishments, Hadrian was also a profoundly troubled individual, tormented by personal struggles and wrestling to find his place in a world that seemed to be evading him. He was often beset with bouts of melancholy and despair. In his later years, he displayed increasingly erratic and unpredictable behavior, striking out at those nearest to him and withdrawing further into his own psyche. Ultimately, it was Hadrian's own arrogance that led to his downfall. In a moment of anger, he appointed as his successor a young man by the name of Lucius Aelius, a reckless and irresponsible individual who was entirely unqualified for the responsibilities of leadership. When Aelius passed away merely a year later, Hadrian had to select a new successor, ultimately choosing a well-regarded senator named Antoninus Pius. This decision would prove to be a prudent one. Antoninus, known for his calm dignity and unwavering honesty, would govern the empire for 23 years, presiding over a period of tranquility and prosperity that came to be recognized as the golden age of the Antonine. Under his steady management, Rome continued to thrive, its borders secure and its citizens satisfied. Yet while the empire reveled in its successes, ominous signs were appearing on the horizon. In the east, a new force was emerging, a fiercely autonomous kingdom that would eventually contest Rome for dominance over the known world. Additionally, within the empire's very core, a different type of ruler was arising, a philosopher-king determined to lead not through warfare and fame, but through wisdom and moral integrity. This man's name was Marcus Aurelius, whose reign would signal the beginning of the decline of the Roman Empire as it had been traditionally understood. But that, as they say, is a tale for another day, a narrative of deterioration and failure, of arrogance and foolishness, of a vision that faltered in the encroaching shadows, of a world evolving faster than even the most formidable of empires could endeavor to adapt. For the moment, let us pause in the golden age of Rome, in an era when the Pax Romana stretched from the misty lands of Britannia to the arid sands of Arabia, and the light of reason and civilization illuminated the night like a guiding beacon. Let us honor the emperors who constructed that legacy, the men who tamed the chaotic forces and stood firm against the savagery lurking at the edges of the known world. From Augustus to Trajan, and from Hadrian to Antoninus Pius, these were the leaders who crafted the fate of an empire and etched their legacies into history's annals. Their narratives are legendary, filled with acts of bravery and timidity, integrity and treachery, showcasing the pinnacles of human endeavor and the troughs of moral decay. Reflecting on their lives and accomplishments, it's impossible not to be captivated by the lasting allure they hold for us. For in their victories and their downfalls, their honors and their errors, we recognize the aspirations and apprehensions, the ambitions and fears of our contemporary world, a reality that's continually evolving, yet somehow remains constant. So here's to the emperors of Rome, to those men who dared to envision a limitless world and constructed an empire that would last for a millennium and beyond. Their legacy resounded through time, a testament to the unyielding spirit of a people who once aspired to reach for the stars. Although the empire they established may have turned to dust and the splendors of Rome have faded into the shadows of history, their remembrance persists in the hearts and minds of everyone inspired by the enchantment and grandeur of the eternal city. As long as humanity dreams of greatness, as long as the human soul longs for the infinite and the unknown, the narrative of Rome will endure, and the emperors who governed her will live on in our memories. Unfortunately, the fate of Valerian would foreshadow the grim challenges awaiting the Roman Empire in the 3rd century. The period of soldier emperors witnessed the swift ascension and demise of military leaders, with a staggering 20 emperors emerging between 235 and 284 AD. The empire was rattled by internal conflicts, barbarian invasions, economic crises, and outbreaks of plague. The inaugural figure among these so-called barracks emperors was Maximus Thrax, a common-born savage who took the throne following the assassination of the youthful Severus Alexander. A Thracian of barbarian lineage, he was a man of immense size and strength. Maximus ascended the military ranks through his undeniable martial skills. As an emperor, he led with the perspective of an ordinary soldier, showing contempt for the embellishments of royal stature. He engaged in relentless campaigns against the Germanic tribes, but his brutal tactics and inability to compensate his soldiers incited a revolt among the officers. In 238, Maximus met his demise outside the gates of Aquileia, and his head was displayed on a pole throughout Rome. The elderly Gordian Fern, a descendant of the renowned Gry brothers, momentarily held power alongside his son, Gordian II. Unfortunately, their rule was short-lived, enduring only 20 days before they were defeated and killed by loyalists of Maximus. Following them were Pupianus and Belinus, a duo of senators swiftly appointed by a fearful Senate. Their fate mirrored that of their predecessors, as they too were murdered by their own Praetorian guards after just 99 days in favor of the 13-year-old. Gordian III. This child emperor's 6-year reign was largely influenced by his advisors, particularly the cunning Praetorian prefect Time Scythius, who sought to secure control by marrying his daughter Tranquillina to the young sovereign. Gordian III did manage some successful campaigns against the Persians, but ultimately died under enigmatic circumstances in 244, likely orchestrated by Philip the Arab, who succeeded Timothy Scythius as Praetorian prefect. Philip, who now claimed the title of emperor, celebrated the millennium of Rome's founding in 248 AD with grand festivities and games, all while the empire continued to deteriorate around him. His attempt to appease the Goths resulted in failure, as other barbarian tribes soon demanded similar tributes. Rebellions erupted in various provinces, including one led by Picatanis in Moesia and another by Dratapanis in Syria. The gravest obstacle arose from Dissus, a seasoned general and senator dispatched to suppress the rebellion in Moea. Instead, the soldiers under Dissus declared him emperor and advanced towards Italy. In 249 AD, Philip was killed in combat near Verona, paving the way for Dissus to assume control over the Roman Empire. Although Dissus's reign lasted a mere 2 years, he is notorious for his widespread persecution of Christians, whom he blamed for inciting the wrath of the gods and bringing calamity upon Rome. Numerous notable Christians were martyred during his time in power, among them Pope Fabian. Dissus himself met an ignoble fate, dying in battle against the invading Goths at the catastrophic encounter of Abritus in 251. The subsequent tumultuous years saw the borders crumble under the assaults of the Goths, Alemanni, Franks, and Persians. A plague ravaged the empire, while the economy descended into hyperinflation. The Emperor Valerian, once a respected senator and capable general, was captured and humiliated by the Persian king Shapur III. Some reports suggest that Valerian was forced to serve as a human footstool by Shapur prior to his execution, with Ai. His skin dyed red and displayed as a trophy. Valerian's son Gallienus, now the sole emperor, confronted a staggering number of usurpers and breakaway regions. The western territories of Gaul, Britain, and Spain seceded to form the so-called Gic Empire under the rebel Postumus. In the east, the skilled general Odenathus from Palmyra established a power base and was recognized as a quasi-co-emperor for his role in defeating the Persians. Following Odenathus's demise, his widow Zenobia claimed independence from Rome, styling their young son as Augustus. Gallienus, an underrated ruler who worked hard to maintain the empire, became a victim of yet another military uprising in 268 AD. One of his top generals, Aureolus, raised the banner of rebellion and was besieged in Milan by Gallienus. In 305 AD, Diocletian and Maximian made the remarkable decision to abdicate together, paving the way for Galerius and Constantius to ascend as the new Augusti. Unfortunately, the peaceful transition that Diocletian hoped for was short-lived. Constantius passed away the following year in Britain, and his troops proclaimed his son Constantine as emperor. Galerius appointed Severus as the Western Augustus, but he soon faced opposition from Maxentius, the son of Maximian, leading to a civil war. Ambitiously, Constantine adeptly maneuvered through the rivalries with other claimants. He achieved a decisive victory over Maxentius at the legendary Battle of the Milvian Bridge, where he fought under the emblem of the Christian cross, following a well-known vision. Subsequently, he formed an alliance with the Eastern Emperor Licinius, solidified by the marriage of his sister. Together, they enacted the Edict of Milan in 313, which granted religious tolerance to Christians and effectively ended the persecutions for good. Nonetheless, the fraternal bond between Constantine and Licinius proved to be fleeting. The two Augusti eventually became estranged and engaged in a sequence of civil wars. A devoted Christian by this time, Constantine ultimately triumphed over the pagan Licinius, reuniting the empire under his singular rule in 324 AD. To mark the beginning of his reign as a new kind of Christian emperor, Constantine established the magnificent new capital of Constantinople on the site of the ancient city of Byzantium. His support was vital for the expansion of Christianity. He generously funded the church, constructed grand basilicas such as the original St. Peter's in Rome, and intervened in church matters. Notably, he convened the First Council of Nicaea in 325 to resolve theological disputes and establish the Nicene Creed, still recited by Christians today. By the conclusion of his reign, Christianity had transformed from a persecuted minority to the dominant religion within the empire. When Constantine passed away in 337, he left behind a profoundly changed empire. In 305 AD, Diocletian and Maximian made an unprecedented decision to abdicate jointly, promoting Galerius and Constantius to the position of new Augusti. Unfortunately, the smooth transfer of power that Diocletian had hoped for was short-lived. The following year, Constantius passed away in Britain, and his troops declared his son Constantine as emperor. Galerius appointed Severus as Western Augustus, but he faced opposition from Maxentius, the son of Maximian, resulting in civil strife. The ambitious Constantine skillfully maneuvered through the conflicts among his rivals. He achieved victory over Maxentius in the historic Battle of the Milvian Bridge, fighting under the emblem of the Christian cross following a renowned vision. Subsequently, he formed an alliance with the Eastern Emperor Licinius, solidified by the marriage of his sister. Together, they enacted the Edict of Milan in 313, establishing religious tolerance for Christians and putting an end to the persecutions definitively. Nonetheless, the brotherly bond between Constantine and Licinius was not to endure. The two Augusti ultimately fell out, leading to a series of civil conflicts. By this time, Constantine had embraced Christianity wholeheartedly and emerged victorious over the pagan Licinius, consolidating the empire under his singular rule by 324 AD. To mark the beginning of his reign as a new type of Christian emperor, Constantine established the magnificent new capital of Constantinople on the grounds of the former city of Byzantium. His support was vital to the expansion of Christianity, as he generously patronized the church, constructed monumental basilicas like the original St. Peter's in Rome, and took an active role in church affairs. Notably, he convened the First Council of Nicaea in 325 to resolve theological disputes and formulate the Nicene Creed, which is still recited by Christians today. By the conclusion of his reign, Christianity had transformed from a persecuted minority faith into the most dominant religion within the empire. Upon his death in 337, Constantine left behind a profoundly changed empire, still plagued by external dangers and internal strife, yet revitalized by a fresh imperial framework and united under a new faith. The bloody chaos of the 3rd century had ended, and Rome was poised to endure in various iterations for another millennia and more. Thus, our brisk exploration of the lives of the Roman emperors comes to an end. The figures we've encountered throughout this journey, from the cunning Augustus to the oppressive Nero, from the indulgent Commodus to the resolute Marcus Aurelius, and from the reform-minded Diocletian to the devout Constantine, showcase the vast landscape of human morals and shortcomings, triumphs and tragedies. Their era was characterized by staggering highs and dreadful lows, extravagant indulgences and casual brutality, shocking betrayals and monumental achievements. Even after 2,000 years, these ancient leaders continue to enchant us through their extraordinary personalities and world-altering actions, their stories reflecting the timeless human experience in all its imperfect glory. Through the lens of these long-gone figures, we gain insights into ourselves and perhaps a cautionary tale from history for our own tumultuous times. This concludes our winding venture into the chronicles of Roman imperial history. If this intriguing exploration of the scandalous revelations of the Caesars has enthralled you, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let your mind wander while considering the essence of power. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.